in the city of the Burgay had been devastated, the homeland of mythical creatures, forcing them to leave their ancestral land and flee to Berg. Here, they were not considered allies who had fought side by side, but were seen as low-class immigrants. They had to live crowded in the slums of Carnival Row. Fairies had their wings clipped, then forced into sex slavery or forced labor. Other fae species were chased, hunted, and even killed simply because they were different. Meanwhile, the humans in Burgay increasingly discriminated against them, viewing the fairies as a burden to society. Instead of freedom and justice, what the fairies received after the war was poverty, discrimination, and bloodshed. The forest was filled with the corpses of fairies. The treaty army had barbed wire everywhere to prevent the fairies from flying. Very quickly, a group of treaty soldiers led by a pack of werewolves hunted down the fairies who were hiding, losing the advantage of their wings. Many fairies were shot dead by the treaty soldiers. They also released monsters to massacre the fairies. In the difficult moment, Vignette appeared. She tightened her grip on the monster's neck and used her wings to fly up. However, the fairy that Vignette had just saved was shot. The treaty soldiers also chased after her, leaving Vignette with no choice but to run away. Very quickly, she jumped off the cliff to escape, but all the fairies in Vignette's rescue mission were dead. Vignette had no choice but to fly to a waiting ship to go to the Republic of Bulgaria. This ship was carrying fairies to the Republic of Bulgaria for asylum. The price was that they would be sold as servants by the ship owner for 5 years to pay off their debts. At this moment, the treaty soldiers fired cannons at the ship. The captain ordered to leave and locked all the fairies in the hold so they could not escape. Below the hold were many other fairies that Vignette had found the day before. That night, a storm came. Vignette sat in the hold. She looked blankly at the picture of a Bulgarian Republic soldier. Not knowing what happened, Vignette seemed very heartbroken. A moment later, the ship hit a reef. Seawater immediately flooded in, drowning everything inside. Vignette screamed for the crew to open the door, but it was too late. Everyone was drowned in the water, along with the picture of the soldier. He was Rycroft. 7 years ago, Rycroft had been ordered by the Republic of Bulgaria to withdraw from the brutal war on the land of the fairies. Their enemies were the allies, who had won and have been slaughtering the opposing fairies ever since. Upon returning to his country, Rycroft had become an inspector. Today, he went to the fairy quarter to investigate a serial killer named Jack. On the way, Rycroft met 2 policemen bullying a goat girl. He immediately taught them a lesson that made them afraid. Next, Rycroft went to a fairy woman named Marie. Every 3 weeks, Jack killed a fairy, but luckily Marie was still alive. Marie told Rycroft that the person who had attacked her had a bald head and a beard. He was also wearing some kind of uniform and has a tattoo on his wrist. At the same time, children playing at the lighthouse discovered a refugee ship drifting ashore. Inside the parliament, everything was unfolding in tension. Sittler was the leader of the opposition, attacking Prime Minister Assalam because Assalam had allowed the Christians to live together with the people. Christians were considered aliens. They were different from normal people. Prime Minister Assalam immediately retorted that it was Sittler's faction that had requested the withdrawal. It had caused the Christian land of Tinanset to fall into the hands of the treaty army. Realizing that he could not argue, Sittler criticized the Prime Minister that he slept with a fairy girl, so he protected them like that. This statement made Assalam very angry. Seeing her husband in a rage, his wife Keber asked him why. The Prime Minister only said that Sittler had said cheap slander. At that moment, their son Jonas appeared. He had just returned from picking flowers in the fairy street. Keber immediately ran after him and advised Jonas not to go there anymore. In the afternoon, Rycroft was looking for Jack, according to the victim's description, when he met Tourmaline, who was also a friend of Vignette. She asked Rycroft if he had found the killer. Rycroft said that Jack would kill people every Tuesday, so he would catch him today. Vignette was held in a cell by the police. Since the ship that sank belonged to Ezra, Vignette had to pay him 50 gold coins, or she would be his maid for 2 years. Therefore, Vignette had to follow Ezra home to work as a maid. Ezra's younger sister, Imogen, was delighted to see that her family had a maid. A while later, Rycroft went to the Alien Elimination Conference to look for suspects, where there were many extremists. The Christians were not the ones who wanted to enter, but wanted to drive them out. At the end of the conference, Rycroft met Sergeant Runyon, who fit the victim's description and had a grudge against the Christians. Therefore, Rycroft wanted to check his hands. Of course, Runyon wouldn't let Rycroft do that. He also insulted Rycroft for sleeping with Christian girls, making Rycroft even more determined to find the culprit to protect them. Seeing that this guy was too brazen, Rycroft punched him. Runyon was extremely angry and promised to tell the boss about this. After that, Rycroft returned to the inn to rest. Here, he was cooked for by the landlady every day. By the way, Rycroft also exercised traumatized with the landlady every night because the landlady's husband had gone to war and never returned. After having sex, the landlady asked Rycroft why he had 2 large scars on his back. Rycroft replied that they were from the war. That morning, Vignette started her job as a maid in the restroom. After that, Imogen asked Vignette to buy her perfume because a neighbor was about to move in and he might be a handsome gentleman. Vignette wanted to take this opportunity to find a husband for herself. Vignette followed Imogen's instructions to the fairy neighborhood. Here, she unexpectedly saw her friend Tourmaline working as a prostitute at a brothel. Tourmaline led Vignette to her room, and the two began to confide in each other about what had happened over the past 7 years. When Tourmaline saw Vignette wearing a widow's tail behind her back, Tourmaline was very surprised because fairy women usually wear widow's tails when their husbands died. Here, Tourmaline revealed to Vignette that Rycroft was still alive. Vignette was very angry because she had been deceived and had to endure the pain in her heart for the past 7 years. Meanwhile, Rycroft was reporting what he had discovered to his boss. He wanted more people to patrol the fairy neighborhood tonight to look for Jack. However, Jack was the fairy killer, so the boss didn't care about this. He asked Rycroft to switch to investigating cases that affected ordinary people, so Rycroft reluctantly left. When he went out, his subordinate John finished sketching Jack's image according to the description. Rycroft wanted John to keep this a secret to continue the investigation. At that moment, the police arrested a passing Navy recruit. John saw this and asked the police why so many Marines were arrested. The police replied that the warships only came ashore once every 3 weeks, so the new recruits had celebrated very enthusiastically last night. Besides, Imogen's neighbor had also moved to the house next door. Ezra and Imogen went over to the house to get acquainted. When they discovered that the homeowner was a goat man named August, they could only quietly leave. That night, Jonas went to the brothel where Tourmaline worked to buy and sell sex. Tourmaline recognized Jonas as the Prime Minister's son, so she quickly went downstairs to welcome him. As a result, Tourmaline gave Jonas the feeling of flying and making love. When the job was finished, Jonas went out to cool off and was attacked and taken away by 2 strangers. Meanwhile, Rycroft and John went to the 3rd pub frequented by the Marines. After a while of observation, Rycroft found a sailor who matched the description. Rycroft pretended to pour wine on him and checked his hand. When he realized he was exposed, the sailor immediately attacked Rycroft to escape. Rycroft also immediately chased after him and asked John to block his way. Runyon quickly ran to the roof. Rycroft was not someone who would give up easily, so he chased closely. Runyon ran a distance and kicked the wooden stick he had prepared in advance to lose Rycroft. Unfortunately for him, Rycroft was good at martial arts, so he climbed up to the roof to follow. Just like that, Runyon and Rycroft chased each other through 36 rooftops. Finally, Runyon had no way to run. Rycroft pulled out his gun and told Runyon not to resist. However, Runyon said that he had seen the devil coming and that Christians would be slaughtered by the devil, and he was just a follower of the devil. As soon as he finished speaking, he also jumped into hell. Late at night, Vignette cut off her widow's rat tail. She took a kitchen knife and flew to find Rycroft. Thanks to the guidance of her friend Tourmaline, Vignette quickly flew there. At this time, Rycroft was fast asleep. Vignette immediately flew up and held the knife to the neck of the person she loved. She questioned Rycroft why Sophie had lied that he was dead. Rycroft replied that he told Sophie to do so. This made Vignette extremely disappointed. They loved each other very much, but Rycroft did not say goodbye but pretended to be dead, leaving her to suffer for 7 years. At this point, Rycroft burst into tears. He expressed that he really wanted to say goodbye to Vignette but couldn't. Hearing that, Vignette immediately pushed the knife into Rycroft's neck and said that she should have killed him the first time they met so she wouldn't have to suffer like this. Rycroft understood that it was wrong to argue with his lover, so he accepted his fate. However, Vignette couldn't bring herself to kill the person she had loved for so long. In the end, she decided to leave. At the same time, on the riverbank, a fairy woman was picking up the things that had drifted from Nar sunken ship. She came across Rycroft's picture. She was suddenly moved to tears when she saw it, but immediately, a growl came from inside the sewer, making the woman extremely scared. She immediately used her wings to crawl away, but unfortunately, a bull-headed monster rushed out and caught her. Then, a terrible scream was heard. Early in the morning, Rycroft woke up to go to work. John was waiting and reported to him that a fairy murder had occurred. Rycroft quickly arrived at the scene. The victim, who had been disemboweled, was the woman Rycroft had met last night. Rycroft realized that someone else had committed this brutal act because Jack was dead and he only hit the victim's head but did not disembowel her. Immediately, Rycroft and John decided to go to the victim's house to investigate further. This woman's name was Alice, and she used to be a famous fairy singer. When Rycroft arrived, he found a silver-haired man hiding in Alice's wardrobe. After asking asking about her health, the man said that he was a friend of Alice's. He had just returned from Bulgaria after visiting Alice, and was then caught by Rycroft. Rycroft continued to question him about whether Alice had any enemies. Saying this, he played Alice's recording for Rycroft to listen to, and it was a wonderful voice. Alice had been once the most famous singer in Bulgaria, and she was loved by many people. However, she had later chosen to live a secluded life to avoid the outside world, so she certainly had no enemies. At this moment, Rycroft saw a picture of a pair of fairy wings and two baby hands hanging on the wall. He asked the silver-haired man if Alice had any children or family. However, he did not answer this question, only saying that Alice had devoted her life to art. Meanwhile, Tourmaline woke up, could not find Jonas anywhere. Jonas's goat guard also entered the room to search. However, Jonas was not in the room because he was locked in a mysterious place. The Prime Minister and his wife quickly learned that their son was missing. Immediately, the Prime Minister went to question the guard about the goat man named Queen. Queen said that he had taken shelter from the rain in the house next door and did not know anything. Hearing this, the Prime Minister immediately decided to fire the goat man. A while later, Rycroft returned to the police station and realized that no one had performed an autopsy on Alice. So he went to see his boss with a big belly to ask for a doctor to perform an autopsy. However, this boss was very prejudiced against Christians and refused Rycroft's request. As a result, Rycroft was forced to hire a goat doctor to perform the autopsy. Through the characteristics of the elven race, the doctor revealed that Alice had been pregnant at least once. Her body was also missing her liver, and the wounds on Alice's sternum were almost impossible for anyone to cause. Back at Vignette, she was washing the dishes for the evening when the landlord, Ezra, approached her. He said that he had lost everything, and now he wanted Vignette to be intimate with him in return for her 50 gold debt. As soon as he finished speaking, he started to sexually assault Vignette. She immediately smashed a bowl on the bastard's head and kicked him in the groin. As Vignette ran away, Imogen and the servant appeared. Ezra immediately said that Vignette was stealing money when he discovered it, but the servant looked into the money box and realized that Vignette did not do it. Vignette had no place to stay, so she decided to join the Black Crows. The Black Crows were former elf soldiers who had fought alongside the Bulgarian army against the Covenant. However, their homeland no longer existed, so now the Black Crows turned to protecting the interests of the elves in Bulgaria. The leader of the Black Crows was Dahlia. She asked Vignette to prove herself by getting the flag in the police station before she could join the group. On this side, the wife Kaber brought a witch named Alfred to search for Jonas's whereabouts. However, the Prime Minister did not believe in these superstitions, so she sent the witch away. However, Kaber stopped that. She said that this witch had successfully matched the Prime Minister and her, so Kaber advised her husband to try it once. It would be okay. Finally, the Prime Minister had to let the witch kill his own bear as a sacrifice. She took out the bear's organs and announced that the person who kidnapped Jonas was a Nang acquaintance. That person was the one who had always wanted to take the seat of power from the Prime Minister. Hearing this, Kaber immediately concluded that it was the leader of the dictator party. The next morning, Rycroft went to work and found the Ezra brothers reporting Vignette's escape. Hearing this, Rycroft immediately made an appointment to meet the two brothers at home. He would give 50 single gold coins to Ezra. In exchange, Ezra had to cancel his service contract with Vignette. Ezra agreed to that. Rycroft continued to question about why Vignette had left when she had never stole. When Ezra's face turned pale, Rycroft understood everything and said goodbye to him. On this side, a woman wearing high heels approached Jonas. It was Kaber. She just observed Jonas for a moment and then turned to meet the witch. The witch was not very pleased because she had served the Kaber family for generations, but no one had asked her to lie. Kaber heard that and affirmed that this would be the only time. Meanwhile, at the police station, a shaman came to find Bulgaria Rycroft and said that he wanted to perform a ritual for Alice to help her escape. Rycroft did not think much and led the shaman to Alice. After the ritual was completed, the shaman realized that Alice's killer was a monster and informed Rycroft. At the same time, Vignette and Tourmaline entered the police station. Tourmaline pretended to be robbed and screamed to attract attention. Taking this opportunity, Alice flew up to take the flag away. Very quickly, the police discovered Vignette, but they did not dare to shoot for fear of collapsing the glass ceiling. Vignette easily took the flag and flew upstairs to lock the door. However, when she went to the window to escape, Rycroft appeared. He advised Vignette not to get involved with the Black Crows group. Vignette was angry with Rycroft, so she ignored this advice. Rycroft watched Vignette fly away and recalled the memory of 7 years ago. At that time, he and his army had marched to the Tinanset Plateau of the Fairy Kingdom. After that, Vignette's army had gone to the Fairy Fortress to camp because they were Bulgarian soldiers soldiers on the same side, they had been welcomed. However, there had been still many conflicts between the two sides. Rycroft had been assigned to check the safety of the surrounding area. When he had gone to the mountain carpet, Rycroft had discovered footprints under the snow. On a hill there was a cave. Rycroft had decided to go in to check. He had walked in the cave for a while and had found a candle inside. As he had lit the lamp and gone deeper, he had realized that this was a giant library of fairies. Suddenly, a fairy girl had jumped down from the roof and held a knife to Rycroft's neck. She was Vignette. She was also the librarian of this sacred library. Rycroft realized that he had just violated the sacred place of fairies, so he wanted Vignette to let him go. He promised not to reveal this location to his superiors. If he was killed, the army would go looking for his body, and they would soon discover this place. Hearing this, Vignette had had no choice but to let Rycroft go. However, she had threatened that if he had revealed the location, she would have killed him. Therefore, Vignette had decided to follow Rycroft closely, fearing that he would not keep his word. The next morning, Rycroft's friend Darius had returned from a reconnaissance mission. He had reported that their communication line had been cut off in the canyon, so Rycroft's army had asked Vignette to bring the power line. She had flown over the 200-meter canyon to connect it to the other end. When the job had been done, Rycroft had given Vignette his book Moonlit Kingdom. Vignette had loved reading, so she had not refused this gift. From there, Vignette and Rycroft had begun to talk more, but they had not known that 3 Covenant soldiers had observed everything from afar. They had taken off their clothes and had injected chemicals into their necks. Very soon, screams from Darius had rung out. When Rycroft had run to check, he had found many of his comrades' bodies scattered. Below, a werewolf had been tearing apart its next victim. It had continued to attack Rycroft, but he had managed to shoot the monster dead in time. Suddenly, another one had rushed forward. Fortunately, Vignette had appeared in time and had stabbed the monster through the head. Darius had also appeared shortly after. He had said that he had strangled one and had only been covered in its blood. However, Darius had actually hidden the wound on his hand. Surprisingly, the monster had transformed back into a normal human. Rycroft had immediately reported what he had just witnessed to his commander so that he could report it to the higher-ups. The Covenant had used something to transform their werewolves without the need for a full moon. After that, Rycroft and Vignette had confided in each other more and more. Eventually, Vignette had given Rycroft her most precious body. They had fallen in love and had even wanted to have children together. A few days later, on a full moon day, Rycroft had seen Darius leaving the camp and had followed him. Darius had quickly taken off all his clothes and had looked into the moonlight. He had been about to transform into a werewolf. Rycroft had witnessed this and had been shocked. The next morning, Darius had woken up next to a dead deer. Rycroft had been waiting and had given Darius his uniform. Darius had admitted that he was infected and that he would confess when he returned home. At the same time, a group of fairies had flown to the fortress. The capital had fallen, so they had flown here to take refuge. In that crowd, Vignette had found Tourmaline. She had quickly taken Tourmaline to her room to rest. When she had learned that Vignette was in love with a Bulgarian, Tourmaline had advised Vignette to stop because she had understood that a love affair between a mortal and a fairy would not have had a good ending. It had turned out that Vignette and Tourmaline had loved each other before, but now they had become friends. Vignette had been in love with Rycroft, so she had not paid attention to Tourmaline's advice. That night, Vignette had confided in Rycroft about the future. She had also noticed that Rycroft had 2 scars on his back. Rycroft had said that he was most likely a hybrid because he had still felt like he had lost something when he had touched the scar. After the war had ended, Rycroft had decided to build a family with Vignette there. In the morning, when Vignette had returned home, she had seen Tourmaline packing her luggage to leave. Since Vignette had decided to stay with Rycroft, Tourmaline had wanted to fly to a cool, remote area to find a new place for herself. Vignette had known that she could not help her ex-girlfriend anymore, so she wished Tourmaline well. Unexpectedly, when Tourmaline had flown away, she had gone to see Rycroft. First, Tourmaline had said that she had witnessed the power of the Allied army and that Bulgaria would be defeated. Rycroft's army would not have left there alive. Vignette had loved Rycroft, so she had been willing to die with him. Therefore, Tourmaline had wanted Rycroft to end his relationship with Vignette if he had truly loved her. When Tourmaline had left, a letter asking the army to retreat immediately had also been sent. The next morning, the Covenant army would be pouring in there. So, the commander had asked everyone to prepare for a quick retreat. Rycroft had heard the news and had immediately followed Vignette because she had been the librarian and had to seal the library. After walking a distance, Rycroft had asked Vignette to leave with the fairy first to the port of Moza, while he and his army would have arrived there later. However, Vignette had not accepted because she had been afraid that the Covenant army would catch up with Rycroft. Vignette had asked him to go east to Enoda with her. Rycroft had understood that Vignette would not go first, so he had pretended to agree. Then, Vignette had given Rycroft her engagement rope and had arranged to meet at the canyon. As he had watched Vignette leave, Rycroft had felt numb because he had known this had probably been the last time he would see Vignette. At that moment, 3 hot air balloons had flown over from afar. Rycroft had immediately run to warn everyone, but the speed of the 3 hot air balloons had been too fast, approaching the fortress with absolute firepower. They had quickly turned the fortress into a sea of fire. Rycroft had been lucky to be only stunned when the bombs had fallen. A moment later, when Vignette had sealed the library, she had seen the fortress being destroyed by 3 hot air balloons. At this time, Rycroft had woken up and had found Samima. He had wanted Samima to help him with only one thing. Very quickly, Samima had flown to Vignette and had told her that Rycroft had died in her hands. Hearing this, Vignette had gone crazy and had flown to the fortress. Fortunately, Samima and her brown-haired friend had been able to stop Vignette in time. Rycroft, Darius, had retreated by a shortcut and had escaped the dangerous situation. Back in the present, Rycroft was standing in the rain in front of the brothel where Tourmaline was working. He saw Vignette coming down and asked Rycroft what his intention was here. Rycroft replied that he came to apologize to her because he had previously told Samima to lie to her. However, he explained that he did so only so that Vignette could survive. However, Vignette still did not forgive Rycroft and left because his actions indirectly killed her heart. At the same time, at the orphanage, a boy wanted to go to the toilet and asked Father Jacob for permission. Father Jacob asked the boy to hurry and return to his bedroom. As soon as the boy left, Father Jacob's screams for help rang out. Through the glass door, everyone could see the monster that had killed Father Jacob earlier. Rycroft quickly arrived at the orphanage. He was an orphan and had lived here since he was a child, very close to Father Jacob and the priest. When Rycroft arrived at the scene, he discovered that Father Jacob had been dismembered by the monster like Alice. He and John went out to investigate further and found hoof prints on the ground. Rycroft followed the hoof prints to the sewer. He went down to check and found a monster sitting nearby. The monster also quickly recognized Rycroft's presence. When he saw the monster coming towards him, Rycroft immediately opened fire. Despite being hit by many bullets, the monster continued to move forward. However, when Rycroft loaded the 6th bullet, the monster disappeared. It left only Father Jacob's liver behind. Next day, Vignette was inducted into the Black Crows after bringing back the flag. However, Dahlia announced some bad news. Their smuggled wine had been confiscated. This proved that there was a spy among the Black Crows. Dahlia wanted the spy to confess so that that person would be exonerated and have the opportunity to spy for both sides. But after many minutes of waiting, no one spoke, so Dahlia announced that she would execute the spy if that person was found. Meanwhile, Rycroft also went to see the wizard he met the day before to ask about the monster. The wizard said that the monster Rycroft saw was most likely a demon king. It was revived from the corpses of many different creatures. The wizard did not know about that magic, so he directed Rycroft to a witch for further investigation. At the same time, Kaber was pressuring the Prime Minister to arrest Sittler soon to question him about their son's whereabouts. However, the Prime Minister did not agree because there was no evidence to arrest Sittler. Kaber heard this and immediately came up with an idea. It was to force Sittler to reveal Jonas's location. Then there would be enough evidence. The Prime Minister thought this was a dangerous move, but he had to take a risk. Rycroft, on his way to the witch, encountered Vignette. He immediately chased after her and advised Vignette not to join the Black Crows. Vignette was angry with Rycroft, so she didn't care about what he said and left immediately. However, their short conversation was seen by Dahlia's subordinates. A moment later, Rycroft went to the witch, who was Alfred. Rycroft asked Alfred to create a demon king from the corpse of a mouse and a catfish. Hearing that, Alfred asked Rycroft if he had thought it through, because creating a demon king required Rycroft's sperm, and the demon king would be immortal until Rycroft died. So Rycroft had to hand over his sperm. The witch asked Rycroft to come back in a few days to see the results. At noon, Dahlia's subordinate called Vignette to the headquarters to meet him. Dahlia suspected Vignette was a spy because she had talked to Rycroft. Vignette claimed that she was just an old friend of Rycroft, so Dahlia told Vignette to find the spy because otherwise the Black Crows would hunt her down. Vignette had a house and told Tourmaline this story. After thinking for a while, Tourmaline found a way to help Vignette. At the same time, at Sittler's mansion, daughter Sophie was asking Sittler to let her go to college. Surprisingly, Sittler flatly refused. He wanted Sophie not to go out to avoid losing face because of her mother's Indian blood. Sophie was locked in the mansion since she was little and was very angry. She declared that she no longer needed to ask Sittler's permission because she had citizenship. Hearing this, Sittler approached and gently grabbed her daughter's ear to threaten her. Suddenly, many of the Prime Minister's guards entered the room. Without waiting for Sittler to react, the guards escorted him to the Prime Minister. When the Prime Minister saw Sittler, he immediately punched Sittler a few times and pressed Sittler for information about his son's whereabouts. Sittler angrily replied that he knew nothing. Hearing this, the Prime Minister ordered the guards to escort Sittler inside for questioning. A moment later, Sittler was beaten unconscious. Keber came to wake Sittler up and gave him a cup of tea. When he saw Keber, Sittler was very happy and said that he had nothing to do with this. At this moment, Sittler vomited fresh blood from the cup of tea he had just drunk. He was in a state of agony, but still could not believe what was happening before his eyes. When Sittler passed away, Keber pretended to cry. She went to inform the Prime Minister that Sittler had died from his injuries. However, before he died, Sittler confessed that Jonas was hidden in the cosplay bathhouse. Meanwhile, Rycroft was also interrogating a member of the Black Crows named Hanlon. In fact, he was a spy, and Rycroft imprisoned him here to deceive Dahlia. After a while of questioning, Rycroft discovered that the Black Crows had nothing to do with the Demon King, so he decided to leave. He said he would release Hanlon tomorrow morning to avoid arousing Dahlia's suspicion. When Rycroft walked out of the cell, he found Tourmaline waiting. Tourmaline explained the whole story to Rycroft and asked him to point out the spot. Rycroft could not risk Vignette's life, so he pointed out to Tourmaline that it was Hanlon. At this moment, John came to report that the Prime Minister had summoned the police to the cosplay bathhouse. Rycroft quickly brought his bodyguards to the place, but Jonas was the only one in the bathhouse. Finally, Jonas was able to return home in the arms of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was very happy to see his son back. He immediately told Jonas that he should thank his mother because she had called the fortune teller to find the mastermind. Suddenly, Keber came again. Hearing the footsteps, Jonas remembered the footsteps inside the bathhouse. This made Jonas pale. A moment later, Vignette returned to headquarters to report that Hanlon was the spy. Dahlia forced Vignette to kill Hanlon herself. Having no other choice, Vignette asked Hanlon to go to the balcony to confide. When Hanlon turned around, Vignette pulled out a knife. She immediately rushed to fight the traitor. However, he managed to block Vignette's knife in time. Just like that, she and the traitor fought fiercely in the air, but evil could not defeat good. Vignette quickly stabbed Hanlon through the wing, causing him to fall. She continued to chase after the traitor. Unexpectedly, when she landed, Hanlon's sneak attack, causing Vignette to collapse. He repeatedly hit Vignette's back. After that, Hanlon pressed on Vignette to commit a depraved act. At this moment, Rycroft appeared and shot Hanlon's head off. He then dumped Hanlon's body in the sewer because the police would not care about the death of the fairy. When the job was done, Rycroft returned the old engagement string to Vignette. He admitted that he should not have accepted it, then Vignette would not have suffered so much. But now, things could not be changed anymore. Rycroft wished Vignette a happy life and left. Vignette took her souvenir back with a heart full of loss. She returned to the headquarters and gave Hanlon's wing to Dahlia. Since Hanlon was dead, Dahlia decided to promote Vignette to be the replacement supervisor. Meanwhile, Rycroft took the opportunity to invite the landlord to dinner. It seemed that he was determined to start a new life to forget Vignette. The next morning, Tourmaline woke up and saw Vignette sitting absent-mindedly in front of the door. It turned out that Vignette had sat there all night thinking about her love affair with Rycroft. On this side, Rycroft also went to the witch to see the results. Unexpectedly, the witch had combined the body of the mouse with the catfish that Rycroft had brought the day before. She turned them into a living monster. Witnessing this, Rycroft turned pale. He continued to ask the witch if the monster he had met the day before had a mind and was not like that. The witch replied that the Demon King had no mind. It was completely controlled by its master. To create such a Demon King, that person must be more talented than herself. At this point, Rycroft gave the witch more money to reincarnate the monster in front of her. The witch immediately cut the monster into 3 parts. She said that this monster would be immortal until Rycroft died. Back to Jonas. Before his marriage, his mother received a prophecy from the fortune tellers on top of Cadbury. The prophecy was that the Prime Minister's son would become greater than his father. Because Jonas was the Prime Minister's son, Keber forced him to double his studies to finish his studies early. This did not make Jonas happy at all. In another development, Jonas's goat bodyguard Paul was scavenging for food. Luckily, Paul discovered his fellow goats lining up for food nearby. When Paul appeared, a goat named Keba happily gave him food. Keba also gave Paul a book that was like their Bible. A while later, Rycroft went to the orphanage to investigate further. He walked to his childhood bed, and the memory of Rycroft as a child appeared. Standing in front of his friends, Rycroft happily boasted about being able to fly. Darius was also raised in this orphanage. Then, Rycroft sat down on the bed and remembered the sound he had often heard outside the window every night. It was a beautiful singing voice and the sound of flapping wings. Then, Rycroft went to Father Jacob's room. The memory of Father Jacob teaching Rycroft how to hide his fairy blood from a young age appeared in his mind. At this point, Rycroft went to ask the teacher about Father Jacob because he wanted to find the murderer of Father Jacob. The teacher revealed a secret to Rycroft. Every night, when Father Jacob had a break, he would take a carriage to the brothel in the fairy quarter. At noon, the teacher took Jonas to the parliament to watch the two debates. Surprisingly, Sophie appeared again. According to Bulgarian law, Sophie was to be the leader of the opposition party, replacing Sittler until the next election. The prime minister thought that Sophie was just a replacement, so he ignored her to discuss new policies. However, Sophie quickly interrupted the prime minister and declared that she would take over her great father's work, which was to protect Bulgaria. With her sharp arguments, Sophie quickly pointed out that the elves and the crusaders had huge differences in race and religion. It was something the prime minister had been ignoring for a long time. Now there needed to be a new mechanism to manage immigrants to ensure the lives of the Bulgarian people. This made the prime minister extremely angry because he could not refute. Meanwhile, his son Jonas intended to take Sophie to bed. A while later, Rycroft went to the only brothel on Fairy Street where Tourmaline worked to investigate. When she found out that Father Jacob was dead, the madam agreed to reveal the pup information so that Rycroft could find the culprit. She led Rycroft to the room where Father Jacob often went. Here, Dr. Mogan was waiting. It turned out that Father Jacob and Mogan had come here to hide their true gender. Rycroft promised not to reveal the relationship between Mogan and Father Jacob. Dr. Mogan did not care about that either. He told Rycroft that Father Jacob was Alice's best friend since before joining the parish, but they had not seen each other for more than 20 years. Rycroft asserted that the two cases were related and left. That night, when Dr. Mogan went to look for the dog in the attic, he was thrown down the stairs. The culprit was a monster, which quickly captured Mogan. Elsewhere, Rycroft returned to Alice's house, looking for Alice's recordings to listen to. Among them was a song that was exactly the same melody that Rycroft had heard when he was a child. At this moment, Rycroft discovered the truth that Alice was the one who sang lullabies to him. Every night during his childhood, he continued to hold the picture of the wings and small hands on the wall, tears falling down. He immediately went to the morgue to see Alice because she was the mother he had longed for so long. However, he had to see Dr. Mogan right after that. Dr. Mogan had been disemboweled by the monster and had his liver removed. When he saw that the doctor was dead, Sergeant Runyon showed no mercy. He said that there was a rumor in the city that Dr. Mogan had surgically removed the wings of fairies to turn them into normal people. Hearing this, Rycroft suddenly remembered his wings from his childhood. The next morning, Vignette had a day off, so she stayed home to confide in Tourmaline. While the two were kissing, her friend Lousy interrupted. She announced that another of their customers had died. At this time, Sophie was also holding Sittler's funeral in a very respectful manner. Caber also came to visit and expressed his condolences to Sittler's poor daughter. However, when the funeral ended, Sophie and the goat maid said that Sittler should have died sooner. Then she laughed happily. Jonas, who was watching, was also shocked and accidentally made a noise. So Jonas had to go downstairs to explain to Sophie. Here, the two found common ground. That is, they were both the only children of powerful families, but they both felt lonely and looked down upon. However, Sophie insisted that her father did not kidnap Jonas. She also hinted that the person who had kidnapped Jonas was sometimes the person closest to Jonas. At noon, Rycroft went home to rest, and the landlady was waiting. Seeing that the landlady was very interested in him, Rycroft began to tell the secret that he was Alice's son to the landlady. Unexpectedly, when she found out the truth, the landlady kicked Rycroft out of the house. A moment later, Vignette was working when she discovered a museum that had just hung a sign displaying artifacts from the fairy kingdom. She felt a bad premonition. Vignette immediately sneaked inside to find out, and the truth appeared before her eyes. The sacred library of the fairies had been transferred to Bulgaria. This made Vignette very depressed because the sacred library was all that remained of the fairy family. Meanwhile, Rycroft went to the prison to visit his friend Darius. When Darius returned, he reported that he was bitten and had been locked up there ever since. Darius was very upset when he heard Rycroft confide that he was a hybrid. Rycroft also told the story to the landlady, and Darius cursed Rycroft terribly. Originally, when Darius had transformed, he had already smelled Rycroft's hybrid scent, but now Rycroft revealed it to others. If Rycroft lost his job, Darius did not know what his fate would be. Hearing this, Rycroft immediately comforted Darius that the landlady would not tell anyone. At the same time, the goatman Paul joined the Church of God, a group of goatmen walking and beating their backs. This action of theirs was was to demand the betrayer of their fellow humans to their religion to come out. Seeing this, a Bulgarian man knocked down the goat man. He cursed the stupid goat men for hitting their own backs and asking the traitor to show up. He said that the traitor was not beaten, so why should he show up? As he spoke, he brutally beat the goat man. Keba saw Paul getting angry and stopped him. Keba said that this was the truth. Normal people would never accept goat men like them. After that, John followed the orders of his boss, Big Belly, to go to the fairy brothel. He asked about what Dr. Mogan was doing here last night. When he knew that Doc Mogan had met Rycroft here last night, John immediately returned to headquarters to report to his boss, Big Belly. Sergeant Runyon also heard everything. He immediately accused Rycroft of being involved in Dr. Mogan's death. At this moment, Rycroft packed all his luggage and went to headquarters. Seeing this, John immediately went to ask Rycroft. Rycroft replied that he was just looking for a place to stay closer to the headquarters. By the way, Rycroft asked about the location of the silver-haired man he met at Alice's house the day before and left. Sergeant Runyon saw this and asked John to follow Rycroft. Meanwhile, at the witch Alfred's house, she was having her fortune told, and the Demon King monster appeared. The witch said that she had already known who it was, but was immediately killed by the monster. However, it was just a vision of the future. Alfred was using her clairvoyance to foresee her death. Keber heard this and asked Alfred to stay here for a while to change the future. Keber had been studying Alfred for a long time, so Alfred asked Keber if Keber still hadn't realized that the future couldn't be changed, especially death at the hands of the devil. Hearing that, Keber was very surprised. She asked for details about Alfred's death, but Alfred only said that she came here to see Jonas's future. Returning to Vignette, she was arrested by the police for breaking into the library. Although Vignette struggled violently, she was still dragged into the car by two strong policemen. A moment later, Rycroft went to see the silver-haired Uncle Junie. Rycroft told Junie that Alice had a child, and that was most likely the reason she had been killed. At this point, Junie revealed to Rycroft that at the height of her fame, Alice knew a man who made her very happy. Then suddenly, one day, Alice cancelled her long-term performance schedule at the monastery. She left for a few months, most likely to give birth. Alice also composed a song related to that issue. It was also the song that Rycroft listened to when he was a child. Rycroft immediately asked Junie where Alice could go to give birth. Junie told Rycroft that Alice was very close to the best watchmaker at that time in the student town. Hearing this, Rycroft immediately left, but he did not know that John had been following him. Sergeant Runyon also went to see the landlady. He asked the landlady why Rycroft had left. Sergeant Runyon immediately returned and informed the big-bellied boss that Rycroft was a mixed-race child because Alice was Rycroft's mother. From there, Sergeant Runyon argued that Rycroft had killed his mother along with Father Jacob and Dr. Mogan to cover up the truth. Hearing this, the big-bellied boss laughed and ordered someone to arrest Rycroft. At this time, Rycroft went to the Ezra brothers' house. The goat maid told Rycroft that Imogen's father had left Alice in Imogen's room. Currently, Imogen's father also arranged for Dr. Mogan to come and deliver Alice's baby. However, when Dr. Mogan took her son away, Alice cried for many days. Alice had always asked the goat maid if the child's father had come to visit her. The goat maid replied that no one had come, but she felt that Alice was very afraid of that person. She also sympathized with Alice's child because the child had wings when he was born, and she always wondered what the boy would be like when he grew up. At this moment, a knock on the door rang. The goat maid opened the door, and it turned out that Sergeant Runyon had led people to arrest Rycroft for the triple murder. Rycroft walked out the door and told the goat maid that he was the child she had mentioned earlier. Meanwhile, Sergeant Runyon took advantage of the time he went out to beat Rycroft in revenge. Rycroft was not an easy person to defeat. He attacked and seriously injured his opponent. Realizing the situation, John immediately stepped in to stop him. After that, Rycroft was taken to the station to face the big-bellied boss. Rycroft knew full well the evil nature of this person, so he said nothing and decided to leave. Sergeant Runyon locked Rycroft in a cell for ordinary people. He also did not forget to announce that Rycroft was a half-breed because he knew that the normal people would not spare Rycroft. When Sergeant Runyon had just left, Vignette, who was imprisoned next to him, warned Rycroft that someone was secretly attacking him. Rycroft quickly reacted and defeated the three thugs. Seeing that Rycroft had superior martial arts skills, the remaining thugs did not dare to continue attacking. Very soon, Sergeant Runyon returned. When he saw that Rycroft was not injured, he was extremely angry. After that, Rycroft was transferred to the cell for half-humans. Here, Rycroft had more opportunities to talk with Vignette. The next morning, Kaber happily returned home and informed Alfred that the culprit had been arrested. However, Alfred knew that the police had arrested the wrong person. Alfred left and did not forget to say that when the fateful moment moment came, Kaber would know who the real culprit was. A while later, Junie packed his bags and went to the countryside to make a living. By chance he met his friend Hosa at the train station. They were very happy to see each other again after several decades apart. Junie asked Hosa if he had been still singing. Hosa replied that he had become a singing teacher for the Prime Minister's son. Coincidentally, Hosa was also looking for an art teacher for Jonas to help him. Junie had a good degree from university, so Hosa wanted Junie to take this position with a very high salary. Junie quickly agreed. The same time, Jonas was riding Sophie in the carriage. When the job was done, Sophie advised Jonas to think about the future. Since his father's empire would soon be ruined, Jonas was not interested in politics, so he said that it was unnecessary. Sophie reminded Jonas that he would pay the price if he did not do what he had to do. Meanwhile, Tourmaline did not see Vignette come home. Last night, she went to the police station to inquire. The fat policeman informed that Vignette had been arrested for disturbing the peace. Then the fat policeman told Tourmaline that if she gave him 50 gold coins, Vignette would be released. Besides, the landlady also went to the police station to look for Rycroft. When the landlady knew that Rycroft was arrested because of her, the landlady felt worried and insecure. She informed Sergeant Runyon that she had made up the story to defame Rycroft because she and Rycroft had had a big argument that day. Sergeant Runyon then led a group of his men to Rycroft for further questioning. Rycroft insisted that he had not killed the other three. However, when Sergeant Runyon asked Rycroft if he was Alice's son, Rycroft, despite knowing that it would put him at a disadvantage, did not deny the truth. As a result, Rycroft was again considered a suspect in the murder by Sergeant Runyon. In the afternoon, Junie came to Jonas's study room. He asked Jonas to turn to chapter 39 of the book that Hosa had taught so that he could continue studying. Jonas responded that he was not interested. Noticing Junie's old shoes, Jonas understood that Junie was in dire need of money. Therefore, he asked Junie to lie to Hosa that he had finished his studies. In return, Junie would be paid double. Otherwise, Jonas would tell Hosa that Junie was a bad teacher. As Jonas left smugly, Junie said that he had met many people like Jonas. They were people who had lived off their father's wealth and had not cared about the future. Junie said that Jonas could leave, but he would never accept money for lying. If Jonas chose to study, Junie said that he would teach Jonas the necessary things to take care of the future. Hearing this, Jonas obediently sat down to study. Back at the police station, Sergeant Runyon was trying to kill Rycroft before he went to court. He told everyone that if one police officer was put on trial for murder, it would affect all the other police officers. So everyone had to work together to find a way to kill Rycroft before he went to court, such as making Rycroft regret and leave this world. Inside, Rycroft was still unaware of the plot. He was talking to Vignette and thought that his biological father had killed someone to cover up the clues and protect his reputation. However, Rycroft did not understand why the monster had not killed him in the sewer. At this point, Rycroft realized there was another possibility. The killer had not known he was Alice's son and had removed the victim's liver to find him. If so, the story was not over yet. At this moment, John entered and warned Rycroft about Sergeant Runyon's plot. Rycroft thanked John and said that he would not let Runyon carry out his plot. That evening, Imogen dressed in a beautiful dress and went to Agast's house to play. During the time Agast moved here, Imogen had many opportunities to interact with Agast. Just like that, Imogen fell in love with Agast without knowing it. Tonight, Imogen decided to give Agast her virginity. Meanwhile, at the Goatman's shrine, Kaba told Paul that God had brought him here because he had a mission for him. Paul, with his piety rising, asked what that mission was. Kaba immediately ordered subordinates to escort the man who had beaten the Goatman in. That man told Paul that Paul had to prove himself by avenging his fellow man. After completing the mission, Paul discovered through the mission that God had given him. Hearing this, Paul hit the man to death with a rock. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Absalom had just returned to the mansion. He was briefed by his advisor on the recent problems in the city, including the good news that they had caught the serial killer. It turned out to be a fairy half-blood who had killed his mother to keep it a secret. When the Prime Minister knew that the victim was named Alice, he questioned his advisor why he was only hearing this news now. A moment later, Rycroft was confiding in Vignette about what had happened in the past 7 years. At this time, Sergeant Runyon appeared and announced that there was an order to take Rycroft to Wright. Knowing that the sergeant was plotting to kill Rycroft, Vignette did not let Rycroft leave. However, she could only shed tears as she watched the hooded police escort Rycroft away. After that, Rycroft was taken to the suburbs by a horse-drawn carriage. The next morning, Rycroft was taken to an abandoned house. Surprisingly, when Rycroft's mask was removed, he saw Prime Minister Absalom standing in front of him. Here, Rycroft was sure that Absalom was his father, so Rycroft asked Absalom to take action. Absalom replied that he wanted wanted to see repentance in Rycroft's eyes. Hearing that, Rycroft asked why he had to repent. Absalom got angry and punched Rycroft. He pointed a gun at Rycroft's head and declared that Rycroft deserved death for killing his biological mother. Hearing that, Rycroft immediately denied that he had killed Alice. However, the Prime Minister went crazy and pulled the trigger. Fortunately, the gun jammed. When the Prime Minister approached with a gun to check, he almost shot himself in the head. At this time, Rycroft told the Prime Minister that he did not know who his mother was. The first time he saw her was when she was lying in a pool of blood. Rycroft originally thought that his father had killed Alice to protect his reputation, but Absalom's actions changed everything. Hearing Rycroft call him father surprised Absalom. Absalom recounted that he and Alice were deeply in love. When he was young, he had often brought Alice to this house every holiday. Unexpectedly, his father, who was also Rycroft's grandfather, had discovered this relationship. He was a powerful and brutal man. He had declared that he would kill Alice if Absalom did not end the relationship. So the two had broken up. After that, Alice had wanted to meet Absalom one last time to say something, but Absalom had not come and had left Alice at their meeting place. Now, Absalom realized that what Alice had wanted to talk about was the son in front of him. Rycroft had also experienced a love affair with Vignette, so he did not blame his father at all. Next, Absalom asked about Rycroft's life. When he found out that Vignette was in prison, Prime Minister said that he would have someone release Vignette immediately. He advised Rycroft and Vignette to go somewhere for a while, because everyone thought that Rycroft was dead. Even the murderer who killed Alice would think so. Elsewhere, Paul was informed about the mission by Keba, so Paul immediately followed the Prime Minister's bodyguard. Paul killed him to get the uniform. Later, when Jonas returned home, Keber confronted Jonas about why he had done that. With Sophie, Jonas nonchalantly replied that it was just a normal love affair. However, surprisingly, Keber forbade Jonas from loving Sophie because Sophie's father was a bad person. Hearing this, Jonas replied that at least Settler had not been bad to him. He told Keber that he had known the whole truth. Keber then explained that he had done everything for Jonas's own good. At this point, Jonas asked what was wrong with his love affair with Sophie. Keber angrily said that Sophie was Jonas's sister. At noon, Alfred was doing a fortune-telling with her organs when he discovered that the Demon King had appeared. Alfred immediately took potions. Then she mixed them together to create a blue solution. She drank it and turned back to face the monster. Alfred looked into the monster's eyes and said that she knew who it was, but the monster immediately killed Alfred. At the brothel, Tourmaline was raising money from everyone to save Vignette. Suddenly, Rycroft appeared and said that Tourmaline did not need to worry about it anymore. At the same time, the Prime Minister returned to the mansion. He asked his advisor to call the police chief to see him immediately. Then, he went into his room and asked his servant to make him tea. While waiting, he took out a letter and wrote an order to release Vignette. When he finished writing, the servant brought tea. The Prime Minister recognized this was Paul and was immediately stabbed many times in the stomach. However, the Prime Minister also managed to knock Paul to the ground. At this time, Paul panicked and immediately ran away. Very quickly, the bodyguards discovered and arrested Paul. Fortunately, the Prime Minister was still alive. Meanwhile, Jonas went to Sophie's house. He told Sophie that the two could not continue this relationship. Unexpectedly, Sophie realized that Keber had talked Jonas about the affair with Sittler. Jonas realized that Sophie had known about this before. He asked why she decided to date someone with the same bloodline. Sophie then led Jonas into the study and asked him if she liked him. Why not? She emphasized that there were many emperors in history who combined with their blood relatives to create greater power, so Jonas could also apply this method. Then, Sophie wrote a request on a piece of paper and gave it to Jonas. At this moment, Sophie's maid Jenny knocked on the door. She informed him that there was a message from the Prime Minister's residence asking Jonas to come home. As soon as Jonas returned home, he heard that the murderer Paul had been locked up in the interrogation room. So Jonas immediately went to the Prime Minister's room. When Jonas appeared, the Prime Minister was very happy. He said that he had no internal injuries, so there was no danger. Unexpectedly, Jonas informed the Prime Minister that he was Settler's son and that Keber had an affair. Hearing this, the Prime Minister immediately corrected him that no matter what happened, Jonas was still his son and he was always proud of that. Jonas replied that he no longer cared whose son he was and left. Here, the Prime Minister was heartbroken and wondered what he had done wrong. That night, Imogen continued to go to August's house to make love. Unexpectedly, this time, Ezra discovered the two kissing through the window, so Ezra immediately took a gun and broke into August's house. When he saw his sister sleeping next to August, Ezra threw Imogen's dress and asked her to go home first. He would talk to August about morality. Ezra asked August to turn his face to the wall so he could die peacefully. Imogen knew that Ezra would kill the the person she loved, so Imogen immediately hit him hard on the arm. August also did not hesitate to give Ezra a beating. Imogen understood that the police would arrest August for beating Ezra, so she asked August to run away with her and lock Ezra up. At the same time, Rycroft realized something was wrong because Vignette had not been released yet. At this moment, everyone inside began to talk about Alfred's death. She was the prophet of the fairy family, so everyone was shocked. Rycroft and Tourmaline immediately went to the scene to investigate. When Tourmaline saw Alfred's body, she could not believe it was true. Rycroft thought that Alfred had also known something, so she had been murdered by the Devil King. Returning to the Prime Minister, when Keber came to visit, the Prime Minister asked her to stop. Thanks to Jonas revealing the truth about Keber's affair, the Prime Minister guessed that Keber was the one behind the murders. He asked how Keber had found out about his illegitimate child, even though he himself was unaware. It wasn't until today, when he met his son, that the truth was revealed. Hearing this, Keber immediately asked where the Prime Minister's son was. The Prime Minister replied that he was only a half-breed and would not affect Jonas's career. Unexpectedly, Keber immediately killed her husband. She began to dig out the Prime Minister's liver to see his secret, and thus Keber found out that Rycroft's weakness was Vignette, who was in prison. On this side, Alfred suddenly spoke to Rycroft. She said that she was dead, and the person behind everything always appeared before her eyes. She was a little girl who was always curious about Alfred's work. When she grew up, she became the Prime Minister's wife. Alfred was on the verge of life and death. She sensed that Keber had killed the Prime Minister. She had also known about Vignette's affair and had sent someone to arrest her. Alfred advised Rycroft to leave quickly to save his love. Rycroft knew that the devil was lurking somewhere inside the sewers, so he immediately went there to find Vignette. Meanwhile, Jonas still did not know what was happening and slowly read the piece of paper that Sophie gave him. It turned out that she wanted to marry Jonas to unite the two largest families in Bulgaria. At this time, the alarm bell rang. When Jonas went inside, he found that the Prime Minister was dead. The security team leader announced that Keber was the only person who had met the Prime Minister while he was alive. They suspected that Keber was involved in this incident. Jonas immediately ordered his guards to find Keber and decide what to do next. However, Keber was in a secret place with Vignette, where she demanded that Vignette show Rycroft where she was. Otherwise, she would disembowel Vignette. At the same time, Rycroft also discovered the Demon King under the sewer. Seeing that the Demon King was still motionless, he knew that it was currently uncontrolled, so Rycroft used a gentle move to sneak behind the monster. Inside, Vignette refused to tell Rycroft where she was, so Keber cut her stomach. In the midst of the difficulty, Rycroft accidentally touched an iron bar, waking up the Demon King. Thanks to that, Keber discovered Rycroft and temporarily let Vignette go. Rycroft walked a distance and discovered the monster was chasing him. He immediately ran away to save his life. The monster was one step faster. It rushed to attack him, forcing Rycroft to decide to ambush the monster on the spot. Rycroft used an axe to cut off the monster's head. This action made Keber feel pain. Immediately, she left to confront Rycroft, leaving Vignette with a scalpel beside her. Rycroft quickly entered Keber's base. There were many dismembered demi-human corpses. Keber appeared and declared that everything should end here. However, Rycroft did not care about that and asked about Vignette. When he knew that Vignette was still alive, Rycroft slowly approached to question Keber. Keber revealed important information to Rycroft. She knew that Rycroft was the Prime Minister's illegitimate child thanks to the letter Alice wrote to her. Rycroft realized that his mother had done everything to protect him, so she had no reason to write to Keber. Just like that, Rycroft went forward to question Keber. Unexpectedly, as soon as he stepped up the stairs, Rycroft was blown away by the Demon King. He was shocked to realize that the Demon King was still alive without his head. Very quickly, the Demon King reattached his head to his neck. Keber closed the door, not giving Rycroft a chance to escape. Rycroft didn't think much and picked up his axe to fight the Demon King. However, the Demon King was too strong and easily sent Rycroft flying. Keber continued to control the Demon King to throw Rycroft away again. Then, she picked up Rycroft and killed him. In the difficult moment, Vignette appeared and stabbed Keber through the head. Since the master was dead, the Demon King had to go to hell. Vignette immediately flew down to check on her bear. The next morning, Jonas summoned the family council to arrest the wireman's accomplice Paul. Then, Jonas called Junie. He gave Junie the threatening letter he found in Keber's room. In the letter, Alice threatened Keber with a sum of money to not reveal the Prime Minister's child to the press. After reading the letter, Junie confirmed that it was not Alice's writing, simply because it was not Alice's tone. This was also what Jonas was most worried about. Jonas said that he no longer needed an art teacher. Hearing that, Junie left. However, Jonas said that he needed an advisor for the Prime Minister. Junie was a righteous man. man, so Jonas needed him to advise him for the difficult days ahead. The reason was that Paul was a member of a large extremist organization of wiremen, and the ferry quarter would be closed due to the wiremen's assassination of the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, Vignette and Rycroft went to the dock. Tourmaline also came to see off and say goodbye to her best friend. Later, when Vignette and Rycroft went to get their tickets to board the ship, they were stopped by the guards. It turned out that Jonas had issued an order not to let Christians leave the city. Meanwhile, Aegis took Imogen and all his staff on the train and went far away. A moment later, Jonas was studying the letter in Keber's room. He discovered a shocking truth. The handwriting on the letter matched the piece of paper that Sophie had given Jonas earlier. At this moment, Sophie also appeared. Jonas gave Sophie the evidence so she could explain. Surprisingly, Sophie was very calm. She said that Jonas was able to become Prime Minister thanks to this letter. Therefore, he had to thank her. Although he knew that Sophie was behind everything, Asylum was not Jonas's biological father, so Jonas decided to forgive him. Later, Jonas appeared before the parliament and declared that he would protect the Bulgarian people by locking all the Christians in Ferry Street. Sophie also declared that her opposition party supported Jonas in fighting the common enemy, the Christians. In fact, all the Christians were arrested and taken there, including the maid Jessica. When Lousy saw that her neighborhood was locked down, she couldn't take it anymore and decided to pack up and leave. At the same time, Vignette was taken to the ferry neighborhood. She wanted Rycroft to stay outside and help the Christians inside. Unexpectedly, Lousy was shot dead while leaving. Vignette saw this and immediately ran to check on her friend. Rycroft realized that something bad had happened, so he told the guards that he was a Christian to get in. When Rycroft entered, he witnessed Vignette and Tourmaline sending Lousy off. He realized that many more people would die like Lousy due to Jonas's cruel policies. Sometime after Jonas ordered all the aliens to be locked up in Fairytown, the situation became more serious. The Black Crows had begun to fight back. Tonight, Vignette led the sisters to cut barbed wire to fly out. Her goal was to attack the army's cargo ship to steal medicine for the people. The first soldiers were attacked by her. Fortunately, there were teammates beside her to help Vignette. Another soldier discovered the incident and opened fire on the three sisters. Vignette immediately made amends by choking him to death. The other two sisters also rushed in to help her clean up the other soldiers. Just like that, the sisters successfully sneaked inside and took the medicine they needed. At the same time, Rycroft was present at the Goat People's Arena. He made a deal with the owner of the Bullhead that the place would host a free match for him. In return, if Rycroft won, the Bullhead would help him rescue Darius. However, Rycroft's opponents were three experienced fighters. After only a few moves, Rycroft was beaten miserably. Then, the giant threw him away like a ball. But when the giant continued to attack, Rycroft quickly grabbed the goat youth who had cursed him to use as a punching bag. Rycroft then hid behind the boss and knocked him down. Seeing this, the opponent rushed to fight but was also knocked down by Rycroft. Then, he used a wooden board to push the giant down. Finally, Rycroft won. With this convincing victory, the Bullhead had to accept the deal to save Darius. A while later, the sky was bright. Vignette and her group of sisters successfully brought medicine back to the people. There, many fairy people were infected with Donbass disease due to not being able to fly, including Oziana, Ken's wife, who also suffered from this disease. Oziana was a good friend of Vignette's since she joined the Black Crows, so Vignette was very sad when Oziana fell ill. It was not until Oziana fell asleep that Vignette returned home. When she saw Rycroft's bruised body, Vignette felt very sad. Therefore, she invited Rycroft to take a bath together to massage him. Meanwhile, in the square, the 5 odd brothers of the Superstitious Society were being led to the guillotine. With Asylum dead, Jonas was appointed Prime Minister for the rest of his term. Jonas could not reveal that his mother, Keber, had killed Asylum. Therefore, he announced to the people that the 5 odd brothers were the ones who had murdered Jonas's parents. Hearing this, the crowd became angry and threw tomatoes at the 5 brothers. Realizing that there was no way out, Paul shouted that Jonas was a liar. However, these words were too late. As Jonas had already ordered the guillotine to be released, Sergeant Runyon then carried the heads of the 5 brothers to the gate of Ferry Street to intimidate everyone. A while later, Junie went to Ferry Street to see Rycroft. The bustling street was now a desolate scene with the corpses of many fairy people who had contracted the Donbass disease. Junie quickly found Rycroft. He said that he had failed to convince Jonas to come here to witness the scene here. Junie realized that Rycroft intended to publicly reveal that he was Asylum's eldest son in the hope of regaining the position of Prime Minister. Therefore, he advised Rycroft to announce this at the Bulgarian meeting tomorrow night at the Parliament building. At that time, the treaty army would come to discuss the alliance between the two countries. Although this could cost cost Rycroft his life. Many fairy people were dying. Finally, Rycroft agreed to let Junie accompany him to the Parliament building tomorrow night. At the same time, Sona was going to Alfred's house to find out what was happening to her. Unexpectedly, when she arrived, she saw Alfred standing inside. Although she was very scared, Sona still decided to go inside. As soon as she touched the door, a vision appeared in Sona's mind. It was the image of Rycroft, covered in wounds, shooting something. Next, a monster crawled down from the roof to chase her. During the climax, Sona was awakened by the noise of her neighbor. Alfred's figure inside the house had completely disappeared. Now, Sona felt extremely scared and immediately ran home. That night, when Sona went for a walk, Alfred appeared again. She started chanting some kind of spell. A green smoke entered Sona's body. This made Sona see a vision of something attacking the Bulgarian police. While she was fascinated, a little girl's scream woke Sona up. The poor girl ran to her crying because her cat had been gutted by Sona. While she was sleepwalking, Sona realized that something was very wrong and immediately ran away. A moment later, Rycroft was cooking dinner for Vignette when the police came and arrested him. They said that Rycroft was an alien and escorted him to John. In fact, John needed help, so he used this method to meet Rycroft. The man Sona saw earlier was brutally murdered. His body was hung high, making John suspect that the elves did it. At this moment, Sergeant Runyon and his army appeared. He was so angry that Rycroft was more handsome than him that he ordered his men to escort Rycroft back to the ferry quarter. Meanwhile, on the other side of the sky, Imogen was walking with her boyfriend Auguste when they were stopped by the Allied airship. They started dropping bombs and forced Auguste's ship to dock. With no other choice, Auguste commanded the crew to go ashore. Unexpectedly, when they arrived, the harbor was in ruins. Auguste took Imogen's hand and together they went to the commander. He questioned the commander about why his soldiers were robbing him. The commander laughed and replied that it was his business. As soon as he finished speaking, a messenger arrived. The commander immediately ordered his men to capture Imogen. She was escorted to a goat woman named Diana. Diana informed her that the Allied forces had been defeated and that this was now a free country where all races were treated equally. Hearing this, Imogen was very surprised because she only thought Diana was a servant. Then, Diana asked why Imogen was holding hands with a goat man. At this point, Imogen felt hot inside. She affirmed that Auguste was a good person and she loved him, so there was no problem. Diana found Auguste quite interesting, so she ordered the maid to invite him here. Back at the port, the commander found the ship's log. He asked who owned the Swan. Auguste claimed that his father was a high-ranking official. He thought that doing so would scare the other party. Therefore, Auguste claimed that he was the owner of the ship and demanded an apology from the commander. The commander approached Auguste and announced that all the crew of the Swan were free. While Auguste was considered a traitor, he had forced hundreds of people to work for him under labor contracts. Therefore, the commander ordered his men to escort Auguste to the execution ground, where there were many people like Auguste. The capitalists lined up and were shot dead. Auguste saw that scene and felt scared. However, the bullets stopped when they reached the goat man, because the maid appeared in time and asked the commander to release Auguste on Diana's orders. Back in Bulgaria, Rycroft admitted to Vignette that he would go to the Parliament building tonight to reclaim his inheritance. Vignette realized that Rycroft was taking a big risk. No one would believe a half-breed like him. If he was unlucky, he would end up in jail or shot dead. Therefore, Vignette strongly opposed his decision. However, tonight was Rycroft's only chance. Half of the Parliament's members from the nobility and the diplomatic delegation would be there. Rycroft confidently stated that he would be fine, and Vignette would just wait for him to return. After saying that, Rycroft left. At the same time, the delegation of the Alliance army arrived at the Parliament building. General Hotel was the head of the diplomatic delegation. He announced that his government was in danger due to the rise of the New Dawn revolutionary organization. He warned that if his regime failed, the revolutionary ideology of the New Dawn would continue to spread to Bulgaria. Therefore, Hotel wanted Bulgaria to finance him with weapons to fight the Allies. While Hotel was giving his speech, Lieutenant General Mujaz signaled to meet Junie privately. Mujaz knew that Junie was an advisor to the Prime Minister, so he wanted Junie to say a few words for him. He was worried that if the Allies failed, the fighting would continue to spread to Bulgaria. Junie also saw an opportunity from the Allies, so he agreed to help Mujaz convey the message. A moment later, Jonas called Sophie, the leader of the opposition party, into the room for a consultation. Sophie was being threatened by members of the party to remove her from office. She advised Jonas to accept Hotel's offer. She believed that if Jonas agreed, both her and Jonas's positions in the party would be more secure. No one wanted to remove their leader during the war. However, Jonas did not want the position, so he refused. Sophie then advised Jonas to think of the country. She argued that if the treaty got involved in a war with the New Dawn, Bulgaria would have an easy opportunity to retake the fairyland. Then Jonas would also become a great leader of the country. Hearing this, Jonas agreed with Sophie. Rycroft went to the warehouse to meet the Buffalo Head. He had succeeded in rescuing Darius from prison as promised. When Darius met Rycroft again, he was very dissatisfied. Darius blamed Rycroft for removing the insignia and causing him such suffering. Darius lost Rycroft's support, so every day he was experimented by the army to research a serum that could transform humans into werewolves in a short time. Philo felt sorry for Darius. He asked Darius to help him tonight to reopen Fairy Street. In the afternoon, Sophie returned home and went to the secret room to meet her maid Jenny. Since all the mutants were locked up in Fairy Street, Jenny had to hide here. Sophie announced that Jenny would be free again in a few days, because if Jonas allied with the Allies, the Fairy Street would have to be open for workers to return to work. In fact, closing Fairy Street was Jenny's idea to take over the bankrupt businesses. When Jenny heard this, she happily asked about her brother's situation in the Fairy Street. Jenny's brother was the goat man who instigated the assassination of Assalam. Therefore, Sophie did not reveal that Jenny's brother was beheaded in the square, but only told Jenny that she would send someone to bring money to Jenny's brother. Very soon, the business owners came to Sophie's house. They were also key members of Sophie's party. The reason they came here was because their businesses were on the verge of bankruptcy due to Jonas's policy of closing Fairy Street. Knowing this, Sophie lent them a large sum of money at a very high interest rate. Sophie advised the business owners that she had convinced Jonas to ally with the treaty army. Then Fairy Street would be open for workers to go back to work, and the business owners would also earn a large sum of money in this case. Therefore, all the business owners agreed to the high-interest loan that Sophie offered. In another development, Sona continued to see the illusion. It was the image of something following Dahlia and her assistant. When the two stopped on the church tower, the thing rushed to attack savagely. At this point, Sona was startled awake. This time, she continued to sleepwalk and gutted a rabbit, just like Alfred had done. That evening, Sona went to the mage Mima for help in finding out what was happening to her. When she heard that Sona was present at Alfred's death and had her power transferred to her, Mima told Sona that she had been given Alfred's power of clairvoyance. It was not a gift but a curse. Meanwhile, Junie had successfully led Rycroft into the Parliament building as planned. All the nobles and half of the Parliament were present to welcome the diplomatic delegation. Jonas also brought Sophie to the place to preside over the ceremony. Rycroft noticed that everything was going according to plan. He stood on high ground and took a deep breath to prepare to speak. Just as he had just spoken, the crows had broken the glass and rushed in. The leader of the group this time was the leader Dahlia. She questioned Jonas's group why they held such a lavish party while her people were dying. After finishing her sentence, she removed the veil from Oziana. Seeing Oziana's condition, Jonas could not bear to look any further. At this point, Dahlia shouted at Jonas and asked him to look straight at what he had done. The fairies were dying from the Donbass disease because they could not fly, and there was no medicine or aid, so Dahlia wanted Jonas to think about what he had done. As soon as Dahlia finished speaking, Oziana went to Jonas to show him what he had caused. Unexpectedly, as soon as she got close to Jonas, Sergeant Runyon pulled out a gun and shot the poor girl dead. The gunshots made everyone evacuate immediately. The Black Crows had to leave because the problem could not be solved anymore. After that, Rycroft returned home and met Vignette. Seeing her lover return safely, Vignette ran to hug him tightly. Late at night, when the couple was sleeping soundly, a commotion outside rang out. The two hurriedly ran out to check. The crowd was extremely dissatisfied with the sight of Dahlia's skull and assistant hanging on the gate. Early that morning, John led the police to investigate. Dahlia's skull and assistant were hung here from 3 to 4 a.m. However, the guards and the people around did not know who did this. Rycroft thought that it was very possible that the culprit was the one who killed the police the day before. After that, the Black Crows brought the remaining belongings of Dahlia and her assistant back for burial. On the way back, Rycroft met Junie. The Prime Minister's advisor said that Jonas had been greatly embarrassed last night, so he could apply psychological pressure to make Jonas open Fairy Street early. Besides, Junie also had a backup plan. Therefore, Rycroft did not need to reveal his identity for the time being. If Junie failed and was caught, Rycroft would use it as his last card. At this time, Sophie and the media team went to the Fairy Street to visit the sick people. Her real purpose was to take advantage of this time to take pictures to create a voice in the hearts of the people. A moment later, Sona came to Rycroft and told him everything she had seen. After that, Rycroft went to see the Buffalo Head boss. He took Darius to Alfred's abandoned house to hide because she was a witch, so no one would dare to go there. As for Junie, she went to see Mujaz. He said that it was necessary to end the alliance between humans and elves like New Dawn. Therefore, he would promote the arms trade between Bulgaria and the Pact. In the afternoon, Junie returned to the Parliament building to be Jonas's advisor. Here, he encountered a funny situation. While they were plotting to reopen the Elven Street, Sophie directly proposed the arms trade to Jonas. Therefore, they needed to reopen the Elven Street to have workers to produce weapons and related essential goods. This action was not only humane, but also helped the Prime Minister to appease the angry elves. Hearing this, Junie hinted to Jonas that he should agree. Jonas immediately accepted Sophie's proposal, but he only allowed workers to go out to work during the day. As soon as everyone left, Santit warned Jonas that Sophie had taken advantage of the acquisition of enterprises. She had used political tricks to manipulate the Bulgarian economy, not for any humanitarian purposes. However, Jonas was psychologically manipulated by Sophie and did not believe Santit. He asked Santit to bring clear evidence before speaking ill of his lover. Returning to Rycroft this afternoon, he took Sona and John to the last church in the city. When stepping out onto the balcony, Sona saw the same statue as in her vision. However, Jack, Dahlia and her assistant were not there. But this was the last church, so Rycroft decided to climb to the roof to take a look. Very quickly, he found the bodies of two unfortunate victims. Rycroft asked Sona if she knew what the killer looked like. Unfortunately, the illusion that Sona experienced was the killer's perspective. Therefore, Rycroft wanted Sona to use Dahlia's organs to find more clues. With no other choice, Sona had to put her hand in Dahlia's pile of organs. A scene of panic in the fairy neighborhood quickly appeared in Sona's eyes. Through the killer's perspective, Sona saw in the mirror that he was a monster. When it arrived in front of Alfred's house, Sona, in the illusion, appeared and attacked it. At night, Sophie returned home with tears streaming down her face to meet Jenny. After witnessing the scene of many fairies dying from the Donbass disease, Sophie changed her mind about taking over the companies. Sophie wanted to open Fairy Street immediately. Hearing this, Jenny slapped her. Jenny thought it was a sign of weakness. Just one more step and Sophie would become the most powerful and richest person in Bulgaria. Jenny kept reminding Sophie of the humiliation she had gone through, trying to make her put her humanity aside. Returning to Sona, after what she had experienced, she decided to go to Alfred's house again to find answers. When she arrived, Sona saw the lights in the house, indicating that someone was there. Thinking it was Alfred, Sona took a knife and went to look for her. However, the witch was nowhere to be seen, only a werewolf. When Sona discovered the reason why the werewolf had to hide here, she felt very sympathetic. She invited him to sit down and made him a cup of coffee to apologize. Rycroft returned home but did not see Vignette anywhere. Therefore, Rycroft decided to go to the Black Crows to find his lover. At this time, the Black Crows were angry because of the death of Oziana, Dahlia, and the assistant. Therefore, Vignette called on the Black Crows to fight to avenge them. When Rycroft entered, he heard what Vignette said. Rycroft immediately told Vignette that the one who killed Dahlia and the assistant was not a policeman but a monster. However, the fact that Sergeant Runyon killed Oziana was undeniable. Therefore, Vignette declared that she would kill Sergeant Runyon to avenge Oziana. Hearing this, Rycroft strongly objected, because if she killed the police, they would burn down the entire Fairy Street in revenge. But Vignette's opinion was determined and could not be changed. Therefore, Rycroft had no choice but to go with Darius to Sergeant Runyon's house to prevent the worst from happening. When Sergeant Runyon just got home, he turned pale in front of two uninvited guests. He still could not give up his aggressive attitude. He approached Rycroft and invited him to fight to end the feud. Rycroft did not accept his provocation. Instead, Rycroft slowly told him that the Black Crows were coming here. They thought the police were involved in Dahlia's death, so they would kill the police one by one in revenge. The first person the Black Crows targeted was Runyon, because he had shot Oziana dead. Before they could exchange much, Darius had smelled the fairy. Rycroft had to go out in front of the house to distract Sergeant Runyon so he could escape. However, Vignette knew Rycroft very well. She ambushed Sergeant Runyon on his way to escape. When Rycroft arrived, he saw Vignette fighting Darius. At this moment, Temo appeared and shot a dart, causing Darius to fall. However, the dart activated Darius's wolf transformation ability, forcing Temo to rush in to stop the werewolf. At the same time, Vignette also rushed in to attack Sergeant Runyon. Sergeant Runyon's carriage ran under the bridge, causing Vignette to lose sight. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Paul took Sergeant Runyon through the sewer to the police station. Meanwhile, in Fairytown, Sona was on her way to see the mage Mima to ask for a way to break the curse of seeing through. Mima said there was only one way to break the curse, but it was extremely painful. Sona did not want to go through the spiritual experience again, so she asked Mima for help. After finishing her sentence, Mima gave Sona a magic book which contained the way to break the curse of seeing through. Sona happily returned home and flipped through the solution, but was stunned to realize that breaking the curse required many extremely rare herbs. At this moment, Darius returned in his wolf form, startling Sona. Seeing Sona panic, Darius ran into the iron cage. A moment later, Sona remembered that Darius was a werewolf. Therefore, she regained her composure and approached him to ask him. At this time, Darius had transformed back into a human, so he asked Sona to get him some things. Rycroft had returned to Fairy Street to have a few drinks to relieve his sorrow. Vignette was worried that the Black Crows would take revenge on Rycroft, so she came to advise him to leave. However, Rycroft was not worried about this problem. He asked Vignette to leave immediately because the police knew about Vignette's pursuit of Sergeant Runyon. At this moment, chaos broke out. The police had come to destroy Fairy Street to arrest Vignette. When Vignette saw the police beating many innocent people to arrest her, she stood up and turned herself in. The next morning, Vignette's trial took place. Here, the judges and the police all believed that they were superior species, so they sentenced Vignette to death for the crime of chasing Sergeant Runyon. When Sona heard that Vignette would be killed tomorrow morning, she gave up the idea of breaking the curse. Instead, she wanted to use her ability to see through things to find a way to help her ex-lover. Sona slit the throat of a chicken and put Vignette's hair in it to perform the magic. When Sona touched the magic solution, a vision appeared. It was the evening scene where Vignette was tied up by the guards on the guillotine, preparing to be beheaded. This scene made Sona extremely heartbroken. Back at Vignette, on the way to the prison, she received a letter informing her that Rycroft would come to rescue her from prison tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, at the Parliament building, Santit had collected evidence that Sophie had been taking over bankrupt companies for profit. When the economy stabilized, Sophie would soon become the richest person in the country. Moreover, Sophie had now pledged to sponsor candidates for Parliament. These people would compete with Jonas's party. Therefore, the previous agreement between the two parties was all a lie, and Sophie had long intended to betray. At this point, Santit also denounced Junie as another traitor. At this time, Junie was using his authority to trade the first batch of weapons with the Allies. Mujaz somehow knew Junie's motive was to reopen the Fairy Quarter, so he tactfully reminded Junie. Junie was quite surprised that Mujaz had guessed his motives correctly, but since it was a win-win situation, Junie advised Mujaz not to reveal the information. Meanwhile, Sophie and Jenny were standing in front of the Fairy Quarter watching the workers go to work. Seeing this scene, Jenny was very happy and congratulated Sophie because she was the richest person in Bulgaria. Not to mention, Sophie would soon become the next prime minister. At noon, Jonas invited Sophie to dinner. Here, Jonas gave Sophie the marriage proposal she had sent earlier. Jonas said that over time, he realized that he loved Sophie very much, so this was the best time for the two of them to come home. After saying that, Jonas knelt down and proposed to Sophie. Seeing this, Sophie was very touched, but she politely refused on the grounds that Bulgaria was currently unstable. Therefore, Sophie wanted the country to stabilize before marrying Jonas. Knowing Sophie's feelings, Jonas did not force her. Later, when Sophie returned to her party, a group of doctors appeared. They announced that the child Sophie held in the Fairy Street was infected with the Donbass disease through the goat man. Therefore, Sophie needed to go to the hospital immediately for a health check. Hearing this, Sophie agreed to follow the group of doctors. However, after a while, Sophie discovered that she had been taken to a deserted area. At this point, Sophie questioned the group of doctors about where they were taking her. At this moment, the group of doctors no longer hid anything. They revealed that Sophie was arrested by order of the Prime Minister. Back at Rycroft, while discussing how to rescue Vignette tomorrow morning, Sona and Darius came to find them. Sophie informed that she had seen a vision of Vignette being murdered in the evening. Therefore, it was very likely that the police would kill Sophie tonight. Therefore, Rycroft had to change his plan to save Vignette tonight. A moment later, Sophie was transferred to the dungeon prison, which was a fortified fortress located alone by the sea. Very quickly, Sophie was imprisoned in the room opposite Vignette. When Vignette found out that Sophie was imprisoned here because she intended to become prime minister, she sympathized with Sophie because they were both women. At night, Jonas summoned Junie for questioning. He suspected that Junie had made a deal to sell weapons to the Allies. Jonas's purpose was to get money to manipulate politics against him, like Sophie. Therefore, Jonas framed Junie for treason and arrested him. At the same time, Rycroft and Ken ambushed two patrolling policemen. Rycroft then disguised himself as a policeman to escort Ken to the dungeon. Once inside, Ken would fly away to distract the police, while Rycroft would take the opportunity to rescue Vignette. The plan was set, but Jonas arrived at the prison one step ahead of Rycroft. He gave Sophie a confession of treason and wanted her to sign it. If Sophie signed, Jonas would spare her life. However, if she signed it, not only would she be wronged, but she would also lose all her assets and her seat in Parliament. So Sophie decided to tear up Jonas's damn paper. Knowing that he could not convince Sophie to confess, Jonas ordered his men to take her to trial. Seeing this injustice, Vignette scolded Jonas as a coward. Insulted, Jonas ordered Vignette to be taken to trial. The guillotine outside was prepared. Sophie, Junie, and Vignette were quickly escorted to the execution ground. At this moment, Rycroft drove a carriage to the scene. The warden sympathized with Rycroft because Jonas had ordered the prison to be locked down for the trial. Hearing that, Rycroft quickly replied that this person was also the target that the Prime Minister wanted to eliminate tonight, so he quickly transported the death row inmate here. With his top acting ability, Rycroft created an unexpected situation. The warden asked Rycroft to wait to ask the Prime Minister's opinion. Inside the execution ground, Sophie was tied to the guillotine. In the moment of life and death, Sophie still stubbornly challenged Jonas to look straight into her eyes. However, Jonas was nothing but cowardly, so he ordered his men to behead Sophie. Immediately, the police started the guillotine to send Sophie away from this world. Even though she was dead, Sophie still stared at Jonas. Now Jonas's eyes showed a bit of cold blood. He continued to order Vignette to be beheaded. Very quickly, Vignette was fixed on the scaffold by his men. This scene was exactly like in Sona's illusion. However, when the executioner made his move, he was slashed in the stomach. Everyone in the execution ground began to panic, not knowing who the culprit was. At this time, another police officer went to hell, followed by two other bastards. The culprit was the monster that Sona had seen in her vision. In just a few short seconds, it had defeated all the police officers inside the execution ground. Then, the monster slowly approached Jonas to ask about his health. It opened its fanged belly and hugged Jonas tightly. In a haunting scene, a monster clutched Jonas tightly and attacked with its fangs, leaving Jonas to suffer a tragic fate. Junie, witnessing this bloody scene, was so frightened that his face turned pale and he quickly hid in a dark corner. Immediately after killing Sophie, Jonas paid the price for his cruel act. After finishing Jonas off, the monster continued to advance towards Vignette. Rycroft, seeing the opportunity, seized the moment the gunshot rang out, knocked out a guard to get inside. He quickly ran to the execution ground, but could not find Vignette anywhere. In a worried voice, Rycroft hurriedly asked Junie about Vignette's whereabouts. The advisor, in a voice filled with fear, replied that the monster had saved Vignette and taken her away. When Rycroft ran to the window to look, he saw the monster fly away. Although Vignette was out of danger, Rycroft and Ken were surrounded by the police, making the situation more tense than ever. Back to August and Imogen, the two decided to join the party as equal partners of the New Dawn to preserve their lives. Living under capitalism for too long, they could not know what was best for themselves. However, Imogen and August still had to work in the armory to have food. During a working day, August planned to escape with the other workers. However, unexpectedly, as soon as he finished discussing the plan, the commander from the day before came to call him away. August was led to the incinerator and met the leader Diana. She gave August an anaconda gun with only one bullet and escorted a masked man who was Ezra, Imogen's brother. He came here with a pistol and asked many people about August and Imogen. Without Diana saying anything, August also knew that Ezra came here with the purpose of killing him and taking Imogen back. However, Ezra was too smart and was arrested by Diana's men for spreading the word that he was a noble. Therefore, Diana did not want to reform this unintelligent man, but she wanted August to decide for himself. August really wanted to kill Ezra, but he was the brother of his lover. Therefore, August brought Ezra to meet Imogen. When he found out that Ezra came here with the intention of killing August and kidnapping her, Imogen felt helpless. Back in Bulgaria, Rycroft was arrested and beaten for breaking into the prison. In his days, Rycroft recalled what happened 7 years ago in the fairyland. At that time, he and Darius were retreating when they were attacked by the treaty army. Darius was shot in the leg, so Rycroft had to fight to give Darius a chance to escape. But after only 2 shots, Rycroft ran out of bullets, so he had to run down to the stream to hide. Unexpectedly, while Rycroft was hiding, a monster attacked the treaty soldiers. Seeing this brutal monster, Rycroft immediately thought in his head that he had to run, otherwise he would be torn to pieces by it. However, Rycroft had just crawled a distance when the body of a treaty soldier fell in front of him. The soldier's body was covered with monster fangs. When Rycroft started to take one of the fangs, the monster appeared behind him. Fortunately, the monster only smelled it and did not eat Rycroft. Then, the monster transformed into an old woman, which surprised Rycroft. It turned out that the old woman had smelled the scent of fairies on Rycroft, so she spared his life. She advised Rycroft to run west to escape the Allied army. When Rycroft returned to the camp, he reported this and showed the fang to the major. Looking at the fang, he realized that the monster was a demon fang. This species had disappeared for a long time and hated humans. Therefore, he simply thought that Rycroft had escaped death by luck. At this time, there was a telegram that the Allied army was approaching the valley. Therefore, the major ordered Rycroft Rycroft to use phosphorus incendiary bullets to burn the valley. This action was to block the regiment's retreat. However, the valley was likely to be inhabited by the Devil's Fangs, so Rycroft resisted this order. At this moment, the major was also tired of the war, so he did not want to deal with Rycroft according to military law. Therefore, he gave Rycroft the choice between the life of the entire regiment and the Devil's Fangs. Facing the lives of hundreds of his comrades, Rycroft had no choice but to obey the major's order. However, when Rycroft fired the bullet into the valley, he felt extremely regretful. There were many demon fangs there. Returning to the present, Rycroft was rescued by John and Sergeant Runyon. This was the way to take the investigation rights of the two prison guards. After being rescued, Vignette was guided by Sona with magic. Sona told her to go to her hiding place. Immediately, Vignette flew to Sona. During the moment, Vignette was on the guillotine, and until she was rescued, she felt Sona was in her head. So Vignette began to confide in her ex-lover about the past, the reason why they became like that. Hearing that, Sona was a bit surprised and asked where Rycroft was. Here, Vignette realized that Rycroft had gone to save her. While Rycroft was being beaten in prison, Vignette was at home having an affair with her ex-lover. At this point, Vignette simply thought that she had escaped so Rycroft would return home. Vignette then asked Sona to run away with her, because she believed that only women could bring happiness to each other. However, Sona refused. She thought that Vignette was just angry with Rycroft. The next morning, Jonas's death changed the balance of power in Bulgaria. All the members of the National Assembly condemned Sophie's execution to eliminate Jonas's rival. Jonas's image had now become a demon. Because there was no evidence to convict her, Junie was released. Santit and the Black Uncle recognized Junie's political influence, so they both invited him to join their party. However, Junie was fed up with these people, so he decided to return to his hometown. When Junie had just walked a distance, Mujaz chased after him. Mujaz said that he did not want to lose a trusted ally, so he advised Junie to continue his political career. Mujaz emphasized that the death of the prime minister would give the mutant haters an opportunity to destroy the fairy town. After finishing his sentence, Mujaz left, leaving Junie alone with his thoughts. In the afternoon, Rycroft was released by John and Sergeant Runyon. In return, he would have to help the police catch the prime minister's killer. Sergeant Runyon, after being saved by Rycroft, rebuilt his life. At this time, Vignette and her ex-lover were walking down the street. She heard that the treaty army had withdrawn from the fairyland to fight the new dawn, so all the fairies were very excited. A while later, when Rycroft returned home, he met Vignette. She held the book that Rycroft had given her in her hand. She said that she would return to the fairyland with Sona. Vignette wanted to follow Sona to protect her, because in the future Sona would be found by the demon fangs. Hearing this, Rycroft realized that his lover had returned to this decision. Therefore, Rycroft wished Vignette happiness, and was ready to help her at any time. Sometimes, breaking up was so painful. Although Rycroft wanted to say a lot of things, he could not say them out loud. The next morning, John and Sergeant Runyon went to find the FA youth, because when the demon fangs appeared, Vignette was also there. They wanted to get information about Vignette from Rycroft. Rycroft replied that Vignette did not see the demon fangs transform, so he wanted to go see Junie to investigate further. Very quickly, the young man FA was present at Jonas's funeral to find Junie. When Junie saw Rycroft, he quickly went out to meet Rycroft. Rycroft wanted Junie to help arrange immigration ships to bring the fairies back to their land. That way they could not only help the fairies, but also eliminate some of the bad guys among the xenophobic people. Junie is currently a neutral representative in the National Assembly, so he also has a certain influence. Therefore, he agreed to propose to the National Assembly to expel the fairies back to their land. That evening, Rycroft came to announce this good news to Vignette and Sona. The FA youth did so to help Vignette and Sona leave Bulgaria safely. When Rycroft left, Sona advised Vignette to chase after him because she did not want Vignette to feel guilty. Sona hoped that Vignette would invite Rycroft to the fairyland to live together. However, this time, Vignette was determined to live true to her gender, so she did not chase after Rycroft. A few days later, Junie successfully proposed to the parliament to provide 2 ships to carry the fairies back to their land. This was the first trip, so children, the elderly and women were given priority to go first, including Vignette and Sona. Everyone was happy because they were about to return to their homeland. On the way to the port, Vignette saw Rycroft watching her from afar. She couldn't hold back her tears, so she turned back to see Rycroft. Vignette wanted Rycroft to come to the fairyland to live with her, and the two of them would rebuild everything together, creating a happy life. Hearing these words, Rycroft changed his mind and decided to go to the port to leave. John saw Rycroft intending to board the ship, so he ran to question him. John didn't understand why Rycroft didn't investigate the demon fangs and just wanted to leave. Rycroft didn't want to lie to his best partner. Therefore, he confessed confessed that he advised John to quit being a police officer because being too upright would cause him to be harmed by cunning people. However, John was very confident in the color of the shirt he was wearing, so he advised Rycroft to think again. John knew that most of the police were corrupt. However, he still persistently pursued justice like his father had done. Hearing this, Rycroft had nothing to say. He wished John a good life. When Rycroft had left a few steps, he saw Vignette from afar. Here, Rycroft and Vignette looked at each other passionately because they were about to have freedom. The two did not rejoice for long, when suddenly, the black crows flew in again. They flew high and dropped homemade bombs on the two ships. The explosion caused the ships to burn, and many soldiers were injured. Seeing this, the army immediately closed the gate to destroy the black crows. A soldier was firing mortar shells at the black crows when he was suddenly killed by the demon fangs. Seeing this scene, everyone was extremely surprised. The demon fangs continued to attack, destroying the soldiers. Normal guns and bullets could not do anything to the demon fangs, which continuously massacred many people. Vignette knew that Rycroft was still locked in the port, so she decided to fly over to check. At the same time, John discovered that Ken was preparing a homemade bomb to attack, so he immediately pulled out his gun to control the terrorist. But John did not expect that the demon fangs had appeared behind him. When he saw his allies appear, his confidence increased by 200%, and he decided to detonate the bomb. At this time, John realized that the monster had approached behind him, as if asking about his health. Rycroft saw the demon fangs coming towards John from afar, and immediately ran over. But when Rycroft arrived, it was too late. John had only a little breath left. He used his eyes to tell Rycroft to avenge him. At this moment, Vignette also flew over. She advised Rycroft to leave this place and think about it. However, after walking a distance, Rycroft knelt on the ground, screaming in madness for the death of his best partner. Vignette saw Rycroft's angry face. She understood his choice and nodded in agreement. Therefore, Rycroft returned to the harbor to find clues to avenge John. Inside the city, people also discovered the incident from the fire. Seeing the situation, cousin Zahn took his lover Saya to Siu's house to see what was going on. Surprisingly, when they arrived, the two found guards standing in front of the house. Zakhan immediately approached to ask what happened. August opened the door and walked out. Very quickly, Imogen also approached him. When Saya saw Imogen standing next to August, she asked about Ezra. Imogen replied that Ezra was dead and held a gastro hand, which surprised the Zakhan couple. Zakhan said that if Imogen needed any help, they should tell him. After that, Zakhan and Saya hurriedly left because they were too shocked. It turned out that a few days ago, the treaty army had attacked New Dawn. Taking this opportunity, the three of August, Imogen, and Ezra had fled. They had avoided the city and followed the main road back to Bulgaria. However, after a day's journey, the treaty soldiers had marched past them. In this situation, Ezra had pulled out a gun and threatened August, asking him to leave because the treaty soldiers would kill the hybrids. If they had been discovered, they would have no other choice. August had counterattacked and took Ezra's gun. However, Ezra had tried to shout loudly for the treaty soldiers to hear. Therefore, Imogen had come to cover Ezra's mouth. In this urgent situation, although Imogen had tried to stop him, Ezra had still screamed madly, forcing Imogen to cover her brother's nose. As a result, when the soldiers had passed by, Ezra had been gone from this world. Imogen had continued her journey in a state of anxiety. Unexpectedly, after half a day of travel, they had been captured by the revolutionaries. The reason was that the revolutionaries had found Ezra on the way, so they knew where August and Imogen had been going. Afterwards, the human and goat couple were escorted to Diana. She informed Imogen that the Allied forces had once again been defeated by the New Dawn. Therefore, Diana wanted Imogen and August to return to Bulgaria as her peace negotiating envoys. When the mission was completed, the two would be freed. This morning, Imogen, August, and Diana's junior Victor took a hot air balloon to Bulgaria. They were welcomed by Junie and the leaders of the two opposition parties. Since the New Dawn had not yet been recognized by Bulgaria, the National Assembly did not want to politicize this meeting. Therefore, the representatives of the two parties wanted Imogen to directly present the wishes of the New Dawn to them. However, Imogen was a well-educated aristocrat, so she requested to negotiate directly with the parliament to end the arms trade between Bulgaria and the Allies. Every citizen of Bulgaria had the right to directly propose their opinion to the parliament. Therefore, the representatives of the two parties could not refuse this request. At this point, Junie said that he would arrange an official meeting for Imogen. Back with Rycroft, he went to the harbor to investigate. When Sergeant Runyon saw Rycroft's face, he rushed over and gave Rycroft a beating. Sergeant Runyon was angry and blamed Rycroft for John's death. However, Rycroft did not refute and said that the demon fang was a male because the male had larger teeth and spines. Not to mention, its way of killing was also different from the the female. Therefore, the target they needed to find was a man. At this time, a warning sound rang out. Rycroft and Sergeant Runyon immediately ran to the source of the sound. The two saw many bodies of Marines drifting ashore. Here, Rycroft realized that on the two ships carrying the fairies, there were also Bulgarian soldiers hiding. The reason became clear: that the Parliament wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to retake the land of the fairies. At night, Vignette angrily went to Ken to question the reason for betraying the fairy clan. Unexpectedly, the Black Crow Temo hiding behind her knocked Vignette out. When she woke up, Vignette realized that she had been taken to the Buffalo Head's warehouse. Ken now begins to explain that the crows had to attack the ship before the fairies boarded it because it was the first ship to bring the Bulgarian soldiers back to the land of the fairies. Bringing the fairies home was just a cover. Vignette realizes that the fairies have been used, and anger wells up inside her. At this moment, Diana appears and announces that the crows have great trust in Vignette, so they want her to continue to lead them. Outside the harbor, Junie sighs, standing over the bodies of hundreds of Bulgarian soldiers. Rycroft soon appears and blames Junie for bringing soldiers back to the land of the fairies. Hearing this, Junie dejectedly replied that that was the reason the ship brought the fairies home so early, because the army was ready to retake their colony. He had to make a disgusting deal with trashy politicians to help the fairies leave their captivity. Although the land of the fairies was occupied by Bulgaria, their life there was still much better than the fairy town. However, Junie's good intentions now turned into an obsession as he delayed the army's departure. Therefore, the deaths of those soldiers became a large part of Junie's responsibility. Hearing these words, Rycroft comforted Junie. He continued to deduce that the Black Crows knew about this, so they attacked. In the previous matter, the Demon Fangs killed humans and fairies to create conflict between them. At this point, Junie revealed that spies had reported that the treaty army was failing and about to surrender. He deduced that it was very possible that Tan Bin Min was the one behind the recent events, so the Demon Fangs were also their people. Returning to Sona, while she was sleeping soundly, she heard a strange sound. She immediately woke up to check and realized that the sound was coming from inside the mirror. Unexpectedly, while eavesdropping, Sona was pulled into the world in the mirror. Darius was sleeping soundly, so he did not detect this strange thing. Suddenly, a hand reached out to ask about Sona's health. It was the witch Alfred. She said that Sona's journey had just begun and gave her power. This caused the mirror to shatter and Darius to wake up. However, when Darius ran to Sona, a piece of broken glass pierced his leg, causing him to transform into a wolf. Seeing this, Sona used her new power to control Darius from transforming back. Meanwhile, at the Bullhead's warehouse, Diana was spreading revolutionary ideas to Vignette. However, Vignette was not interested in this idea. She only heard that Diana would help her fairy clan to be free, so she agreed to cooperate with her. Afterwards, Vignette went to apologize to Ken for falsely accusing him. Vignette did not approve of the Demon Fangs killing so many people. Ken also shared Vignette's opinion. However, it was better for them to have the Demon Fangs on the same side as the fairy clan. At this point, Vignette asked who the Demon Fangs were. Ken replied that the Demon Fang could be anyone, and only Diana knew the exact answer. At the same time, Rycroft came to Sona. He wanted Sona to show him where the Demon Fang would appear in the previous illusion to ambush it. When he knew where the Demon Fang would appear, Rycroft assigned the task. He would distract it when it arrived, so Darius would use a machine gun to shoot it. However, to know exactly when the Demon Fang would arrive, Rycroft asked Sona to use her ability to enter its head to lure it here. Hearing that, Sona agreed with Rycroft, but she needed Rycroft to provide fur, fangs, or anything on the Demon Fang's body. So, Rycroft went to the police station with Sergeant Runyon to get the Demon Fang from John's body. Then, he asked Sergeant Runyon to provide him with a machine gun so that he could destroy the Demon Fang. In the city center, Junie led 500 of his men to arrest Victor, Imogen, and August. Imogen heard that she was accused of terrorism, abusing democratic freedoms to oppose the state. She affirmed that she and August knew nothing about these things. She thought that the recent attacks were most likely carried out by New Dawn. The lovers had witnessed New Dawn killing their own people for disobeying orders, so they advised Imogen to abandon the path of evil and follow justice if she wanted to live. Hearing this, Victor quickly agreed. He said that he would write a letter to the organization to prevent the next attack, and Tan Bin Min would definitely agree in exchange for peace for the two countries. However, after finishing the letter, Victor asked August to personally deliver that letter to Fairy Street. The reason he gave was that his people knew August, so they would believe that this letter was written by him. Seeing this, Junie left with a satisfied smile, not forgetting to order his subordinates to follow where August would go. After that, August went to the bar on Fairy Street, according to Victor's Victor's instructions. When he arrived, Junie's spy also followed. Vignette, now a member of the New Dawn, was tasked with escorting Auguste. She told Auguste that he was being followed and asked him to follow her. The spy, seeing that the situation was not good, secretly followed them, but was invited back by the fairy and drank beer. Very soon, Vignette took Auguste to the Bullhead's warehouse. There, two of Diana's men took Auguste away. When Diana read Victor's letter, she said that Auguste and Imogen had made a serious mistake. In fact, Victor had revealed in the letter that Imogen had betrayed her and would not speak before the National Assembly. Therefore, she ordered her men to take Auguste and torture him. A moment later, Junie was furious at the return of a spy who everyone knew was a spy. Junie immediately reported this to the leaders of both parties, and they were also furious that the surveillance plan had failed. Therefore, Santit ordered Imogen and Auguste to be killed. Meanwhile, the Black Uncle of the opposition party ordered the leveling of Fairy Street in order to eliminate all the comrades of Tan Bin Min. Hearing this, Junie quickly advised the two not to carry out such an action, because if there was a war in the country, the results of the upcoming election would not need to be discussed. The two old fox uncles heard these words and immediately changed their minds. The leveling of Fairy Street was just a joke. They would agree to listen to Imogen present Tan Bin Min's opinion to the National Assembly. That evening, when Imogen was worried about Auguste, a box was sent to her house. Victor took the box inside and showed it to Imogen. Unexpectedly, it was Auguste's horn inside, which made Imogen pale with fear. At this point, Victor threatened Imogen to speak to Parliament as Diana had instructed. Otherwise, she would kill Auguste. At the white supremacist bar, police officer Abed said that Sergeant Ranyun had betrayed the group because he had repeatedly helped Rycroft. Therefore, he would now become the leader of the group and lead everyone to eliminate the mutants. After speaking, Abed got drunk and went out. At this moment, Vignette, Ken, and Temo flew in. Vignette thought that Diana had sent her here to scare the white people, but Ken gave her a bottle of Molotov cocktails. Vignette realized that Ken and Temo's intention was to kill the people inside, so she protested. However, Temo and Ken did not listen and coldly threw Molotov cocktails inside. Very quickly, the fire broke out, cutting off the way out. Just like that, the white supremacists who had not yet eliminated the mutant race had to receive retribution. However, that bastard Abbott escaped death because he went outside to vomit. Early the next morning, Sergeant Ranyun brought the machine gun to Rycroft. Rycroft immediately brought it back to Alfred's house to set up an ambush. As for Sona, she had already drawn the blood of death on her face, preparing to go all in with the demon fangs. She began to put the demon fangs in to steal blood and recite the spell. Very quickly, the spell took effect. Sona saw in the demon fang's eyes the scene of Junie receiving the UN delegation. At that moment, the demon fang discovered Sona and turned back to the mirror. He also had psychic abilities, so he realized that Sona had been peeping. Sona quickly informed Rycroft that the demon fang was Mujaz. When Rycroft knew about this, he immediately went to the National Assembly to warn them. At the same time, Abed brought all the white supremacists to surround Fairy Street in revenge. Vignette and Ken returned to Fairy Street by another route to report the situation to Diana. Unexpectedly, upon arriving at the warehouse, Vignette was shocked to see Auguste hanging upside down and his horn cut off. At this point, she formed a different opinion about Diana. Diana's plan had been to lure the white supremacists into Fairy Street to destroy them. Meanwhile, Mujaz would transform into a demon fang and massacre the National Assembly to cause chaos in Bulgaria. After that, her army would start to infiltrate and invade Bulgaria. Inside the parliament, Junie had brought Mujaz and the general to the waiting room. The representative of the treaty army would be given a speech after Imogen's speech. When he saw Mujaz coming, Victor gave Imogen a speech and asked her to speak according to its content. Imogen started to practice reading the speech to save Auguste's life. While reading, she found Victor and Mujaz looking at each other as if they had known each other before. At this moment, all the members of the parliament were present. The representatives of the two parties wanted Junie to invite Imogen to speak quickly to save time. Therefore, Junie quickly went to Imogen. When Junie arrived, Imogen followed him and pretended to faint. Seeing this, Junie asked Victor to get Imogen a glass of water. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Imogen informed Junie that Victor and Mujaz knew each other and were plotting something. At this point, Junie said that Imogen could rest a bit to regain her strength. Next, he talked to Mujaz and asked why he worked for the New Dawn. Knowing that he had been exposed, Mujaz said that the allies would definitely lose, but they would fight to the last soldier. He thought that it was pointless, so he would support the New Dawn's peace treaty in the speech. Hearing this, Junie also nodded to Mujaz. However, he did not believe what Mujaz said, because if doing so, Mujaz would be the first to be killed by the allies. Returning to Fairy Street, the police were about to be unable to stop the white supremacists. Seeing this, Diana Diana immediately distributed guns to everyone to prepare to ambush the white men. Therefore all the personnel gathered at her place. Taking this opportunity, August broke the rope and escaped. Outside the ferry street, Abed lost his patience and confronted Sergeant Ranyun. He threatened that if Sergeant Ranyun blocked his way, the police would have to shed the first blood. Faced with the threat to his life, the sergeant ordered his men to open the door. Abed immediately screamed, ordering 500 of the Shanteng brothers to take up arms and enter Ferry Street. The bastards entered and killed all the innocent fairies who appeared on their way. Very quickly, Vignette appeared and sent a white supremacist off from this world. Abed realized that Vignette had killed his comrades last night, so he ordered everyone to chase after her. However, these superiors did not know that they were running into an ambush. At this moment, Rycroft ran to the parliament. He quickly gave Junie's letter of recommendation to the commander and informed that the Devil's Fang was inside the building. However, the army was not allowed to raise the alarm and had to quietly enter inside the parliament. Junie did not realize the danger, so he let Imogen speak. As soon as everyone left, Rycroft went inside to meet Junie. Mujaz realized that something was wrong, so he stopped to listen. Rycroft thought that Mujaz was too far away to hear, so he whispered to Junie that Mujaz was the Devil's Fang. However, unexpectedly, Mujaz actually heard and smiled deeply. Hotl, not knowing this, turned back to call Mujaz and was stabbed in the stomach by him. Now Mujaz had nothing to hide, so he quickly transformed into a demon fang. However, he did not attack Rycroft, but ran to massacre the parliament. But because there were soldiers waiting in ambush, the demon fang was blocked. Rycroft immediately ran to the parliament to prevent the demon fang from entering. The senators saw this and quickly locked the door. But unexpectedly, the demon fang was so strong that it broke the door. When it was about to enter, Rycroft opened fire. Feeling that it was being scratched, the demon fang turned around and slapped Rycroft. While Rycroft was about to be eaten, Sona's scream echoed in the demon fang's head. It turned out that Sona was using her psychic ability to control it. Feeling the danger, the demon fang flew away to find Sona. And Sona, after a successful tease, realized that she had just been naughty. Diana saw the demon fang flying here and knew that the plan had failed. Seeing that, Vignette was extremely panicked and turned the car to find Sona. Diana knew that Vignette would stop the demon fang, so she shot at her but failed. The Revolutionary Army heard the gunshots and simultaneously fired bullets at the white supremacists. Karma had come to each of the supreme species. At the same time, the demon fang had come to Sona. At this moment, Sona realized that life was no longer boring, so she decided to step out to make the demon fang bored with her. Suddenly, while fighting with the demon fang, Darius transformed into a wolf and rushed over. Sona was very worried about Darius, so she went over to check, but very quickly, the demon fang threw Darius away. When Sona saw her new best friend seriously injured, she became furious. She used everything she had to risk her life with the demon fang. However, her ability was only enough to throw the demon fang away without causing any fatal damage to it. Luckily, while Sona was about to run out of strength, Vignette appeared. Vignette used a torch to hit the demon fang's mouth. Being hit hard, the demon fang got angry and slapped Vignette in return. In the difficult moment, Rycroft arrived in time and shot the demon fang in the mouth. However, it quickly hugged him. Unexpectedly, Rycroft's halo was so bright that it pierced the demon fang's head. Fortunately, it had not had time to bite Rycroft, so he was still safe. However, Darius was not so lucky. He was scratched by the demon fang and was in a dying state. Sona knew that she could not help him anymore, so she went to Darius to wish him the best. Rycroft also went to his close friend's side. Here, Darius congratulated Rycroft for destroying the demon fang. He said that if there was a next life, the two would still be brothers. Right after he finished speaking, Darius left this world forever, leaving Rycroft heartbroken over the loss of a friend. Afterwards, Rycroft suppressed his grief and went to check on Vignette. Vignette said she was still healthy and confessed to Rycroft that she loved Sona again. Rycroft was not surprised to hear that, as he had realized it long ago. Therefore, Rycroft could only bless Vignette with Sona. A moment later, Rycroft dragged the demon's fang body out. Seeing this, Temo angrily aimed at Rycroft, but Diana realized that her hope was dead, so she stopped Temo. She ordered the revolutionary comrades to temporarily retreat. Unexpectedly, when Temo escorted Diana away, Auguste blocked the way. Seeing this, Temo rushed in, but Auguste shot her. Auguste declared that Diana's revolutionary path ended here. Hearing this, Diana replied that it did not matter because her revolutionary ideas had spread. Having said that, Diana put a knife to her neck to leave this world. At this moment, the police rushed in to clean up the mess. However, Abed was not dead yet, but hid behind Rycroft and shot him to vent his anger. But retribution came very soon. Sergeant Ranyun next to him shot Abed in the head to atone for his mistake. 2 months later, the fairy was sent back to the fairyland. Therefore, Junie's political goal was completed, so he returned to to his acting job with the elves, and Rycroft recovered. Now, the identity of Asylum's eldest son was clear. Therefore, the Parliament invited Rycroft to be Prime Minister until the end of his term. However, Rycroft came to Parliament just to tell them that humans and fairies are equal. If Parliament does not change soon, it will not be possible to do business. Thanks to Rycroft's speech, the thinking of all the people has changed. The couple Imogen and Agust were free to hold their wedding ceremony in front of everyone. In another development in the fairyland, the magician Mima is presiding over the wedding ceremony for Vignette and Sona. Both of them have cut off their love buttons and given them to each other. After that, they flew into the air and kissed each other in an extremely romantic way. This is also the scene that Rycroft did not want to see the most. Therefore, Rycroft decided to leave Bulgaria to find a lover for himself. The movie ends here. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you again.